She did not look at him when she walked through those cathedral doors. 200 guests rose to their feet, and the music swelled, and every eye in the room turned to the bride. But Clara Ashford kept her gaze fixed on the altar, on the candles, on the stone floor beneath her feet. Not on the Duke. When she finally reached him and lifted her eyes to his face, Adrian Whitmore felt something he had not felt in 35 years of living, the absolute, terrifying certainty that he had made a mistake. Not in choosing her, in thinking even for one moment that this was only a transaction. Before we begin, subscribe to the Duke's Diary and stay until the very end of this story. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The morning of his wedding, Adrian Whitmore stood at the window of his dressing room at Ravenshire Manor and told himself, for the last time, that this was the correct decision. He had made correct decisions his entire life. He had inherited the dukedom at 22, when his father died suddenly and left behind a title, an estate, and a mountain of obligations that would have crushed a smaller man. He had spent the years since rebuilding what time and poor management had eroded, restoring the tenant farms, settling the legal disputes, securing the family's financial future with the same methodical patience he brought to everything. He had done it without complaint and without assistance, because that was what a duke did. A duke did not falter, a duke did not ask for help. A duke certainly did not stand at a window on his wedding morning, wondering if he had miscalculated something fundamental. And yet, Your Grace, his valet, Davies, appeared at his elbow with the cufflinks. "It is time, I know, the carriage, I know, Davies." He turned from the window and held out his wrists, and let the man fasten the links. His reflection in the glass showed him exactly what he expected, a duke. Composed, controlled, the expression of a man who had managed every crisis that had presented itself for 13 years and had never once allowed any of them to see him uncertain. He held the expression in place and went downstairs. The cathedral was everything his mother had insisted upon. St. Bartholomew's, the church where Whitmore men had married for 4 generations, with its soaring arched ceilings and the particular quality of winter light that came through the high windows and fell in long, pale columns across the stone floor. The pews were filled with exactly the right people. His solicitor, Mr. Hatch, his estate manager, Mr. Carey. Half the county's noble families, arranged in the careful social geography that these events required. His cousin Frederick in the second row, with the expression of a man attending a funeral rather than a wedding, which was, Adrian thought, not entirely inaccurate. He stood at the altar and did not fidget, and did not look at his watch, and did not permit himself to think about anything except the next 10 minutes, which was the only way he had ever managed to get through large public occasions with his composure intact. The organ began. He turned. The doors at the far end of the aisle opened and Clara Ashford appeared. He had met her 3 times, 3 formal meetings in the drawing rooms of mutual acquaintances, conversations managed carefully by her mother on one side, and his solicitor on the other. Everything conducted with the polite efficiency of people who understood they were negotiating a contract and did not want to waste anyone's time with sentiment. He had assessed her in those meetings the way he assessed everything methodically, without prejudice, looking for the qualities the situation required. She had them. She was educated, composed from a family whose name still commanded respect even if their finances had declined. She was exactly what he needed. He had not, in those 3 meetings, truly looked at her. He was looking at her now. She was not looking back. That was the first thing he noticed. Every bride he had ever seen process down an aisle had her eyes fixed on the groom, not necessarily with love, but with the trained social awareness of a woman who understood she was performing for an audience, and that the performance required her to look at the man waiting for her. Clara Ashford was not looking at him. She was looking at the altar, at the candles, at the floor, and her expression was not nervous or uncertain. It was composed in a way that was entirely her own, not the performed composure of social training, but the real thing, the composure of a woman who had made her decision privately and was now simply living it out. Her dress was ivory silk, simply cut, without the elaborate ornamentation that fashion currently demanded. Her hair was dark, arranged at the back of her head, with no jewels except the small pearl earrings he could just distinguish at this distance. She was not dressed to impress the room. She was dressed, he thought, to attend her own wedding, which was a distinction that struck him as important, though he could not immediately have said why. She reached the altar. She stopped beside him. She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were hazel, he saw, not the fashionable blue or gray that poets preferred, but a warm, complex hazel that was simultaneously brown and green depending on the light. And the thing that struck him, the thing that stopped him, momentarily, from remembering that he was supposed to be attending to the clergyman, was that she was not performing anything. She looked at him the way one person looks at another when they are trying to determine what they are actually dealing with. Honest assessment, no flattery, no fear, no attempt to be what he might want her to be. She saw him. He was not accustomed to being seen. The clergyman began. The words flowed in the familiar pattern of the service. He had attended enough of these to know the rhythm. And Adrian's responded at the correct moments, and took her hand when it was required, and placed the ring on her with steady hands. And all of it happened at a slight remove, as though he were observing himself from a short distance and making notes. Her hand was cold. He had not expected that. He did not know what he had expected, something abstract, something correctly formal, but not the specific reality of a person's cold hand, which told him something he could not quite name yet about what she was feeling underneath the composure. I now pronounce you husband and wife. He turned to face her. For 1 second, just one, something moved through her expression. Not joy, not relief, something older and more complicated. He had the sudden absolute conviction that whatever she was feeling in this moment, she had not told anyone about it. Then it was gone. The audience began to applaud, quietly in the manner of church weddings, and Clara turned toward the aisle, and he took her arm, and they walked back through the cathedral together as the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire. He did not say anything, neither did she. The wedding breakfast at Ravenshire Manor lasted 3 hours, which was the correct length for an event of this social weight, long enough to demonstrate prosperity, short enough to avoid the particular exhaustion that set in after the 4th hour of polite conversation. Adrian performed his portion flawlessly. He accepted congratulations with the controlled warmth that social events demanded. He spoke with his solicitor about 2 pending estate matters. He managed a 20-minute conversation with Lord Ashford, Clara's father, a pleasant, somewhat defeated man who kept touching his cravat as though it had done him some personal wrong. He answered Frederick's pointed questions about the settlement terms with patience he did not entirely feel. He was aware throughout all of this of exactly where Clara was. This was new. He had never been aware of anyone's location at a social event before. He managed gatherings the way he managed estate accounts, comprehensively, efficiently, with full attention given to whatever required it at any given moment. But Clara moved through the room with a specific quality that kept drawing his peripheral notice. She spoke to everyone who approached her with the same attention she would have given someone important, the younger cousins who had no social influence, the elderly aunt who repeated herself, the 2 housemaids who appeared briefly at the edge of the room to observe the celebration and then retreated. Clara saw them. She turned and acknowledged them with a small, genuine smile before they could disappear entirely. He noticed this. He was not supposed to be noticing things like this. He was supposed to be managing the event. Frederick materialized at his elbow. Well, Frederick said, in the tone he used when he was about to say something Adrian would find irritating. She's not what I expected. Clara has excellent breeding. I don't mean her family, I mean her. Frederick nodded in Clara's direction. She's been talking to old Mrs. Carey for 20 minutes. Not in the polite way people talk to tenants' wives at events like this. Actually talking, Adrian took a measured sip from his glass. Is there a point to this observation? The point, Frederick said, is that you're watching her and you don't know you're doing it. Adrian looked at his cousin. Frederick held up a hand. I'm not saying anything. I'm simply observing that for a man who approached this marriage as a business arrangement, you seem rather. He paused, appearing to search for the correct word. Attentive, Frederick. Yes, go speak to Lord Ashford. He has been standing alone by the fireplace for 11 minutes. Frederick went. Adrian turned back to the room and made himself attend to what was actually in front of him, and not to the woman across the hall who was saying something to Mrs. Carey that had made the old woman laugh, a real laugh. Surprised out of her, the kind you could not manufacture with social performance. By the time the guests began to depart, the light had gone flat and cold, and the fires in the reception rooms had been built up against the February chill. Adrian stood in the entrance hall and completed the final rounds of farewell, the handshakes, the brief conversations, the formal exchange of pleasantries that marked the end of a properly conducted event. Clara stood beside him. This was the first time they had stood beside each other for an extended period, and he was aware, against his intentions, of the specific quality of her stillness. Most people fidgeted at these moments, shifted their weight, touched their face, found small physical releases for the effort of maintaining social performance. Clara was simply still, not rigid, not uncomfortable. Simply present in the complete way that some people manage without effort and most do not manage at all. The last guest departed. The entrance hall became quiet. The servants moved efficiently through the background, removing glasses, extinguishing unnecessary candles, carrying out the invisible labor of restoring the house to its ordinary state. Davies appeared briefly, collected Adrian's coat from the chair where he had left it, and vanished again with the expertise of a man who knew when his presence was not needed. Adrian turned to Clara. She was looking at the portraits on the wall. The Whitmore family, 3 generations of them, arranged in the formal arrangement that had been there since before he was born. She looked at them with the same honest attention she gave everything, not admiring them, not performing appreciation, simply looking. "Your ancestors," she said. "Yes, they all have the same expression." She turned to look at him. "I wonder if it comes with the title, or if it is something the portrait painters did on purpose." He looked at the portraits. He had stopped seeing them. Years ago they were simply part of the house, the permanent furniture of a Whitmore childhood, present the way the walls were present. He looked at them now with whatever portion of his mind she had redirected. She was right. They all had the same expression, controlled, composed, ready for something. "What expression do you mean precisely?" he asked. "The expression of a man preparing to manage something." She looked back at the portraits. "Not a bad expression, a responsible one, but I notice," she stopped. "Continue. I noticed that none of them looked particularly happy." The silence that followed was a half-beat too long to be entirely comfortable. "They were responsible men," he said. "Yes." She turned to face him fully. "I had not meant it as a criticism. I did not take it as one." She looked at him for a moment, the same direct, unperformed assessment she had given him at the altar, and he had the same sensation he had had then, of being looked at by someone who was not going to adjust what they saw to be more convenient. "We have been very polite to each other today," she said. "Weddings generally call for it, they do." She tilted her head slightly. "May I ask you something directly?" "You may. Did you want this?" She said it without particular emphasis, just the words, clean and genuine. The question of someone who actually wanted to know the answer. "The marriage. Not the arrangement. I understand the arrangement. But the marriage itself. Did you want it?" No one had asked him this. Not his solicitor, not his cousin, not his mother in the 2 years before she died, when the subject of his needing to marry had been discussed at length. The question had simply never appeared, because everyone around him had assumed either that he had no feelings about it, or that his feelings were irrelevant. He looked at her. "That is an unusual wedding day question," he said. "I know." She did not apologize for it. "I am asking because I would like us to be honest with each other if that is possible. I understand what was arranged and why. I have no illusions about it. But I find that I cannot manage very well in situations where I don't know what is actually true, and I would rather ask and be uncomfortable for a moment than spend the next several months guessing." He thought about this. He had managed 3 formal meetings with this woman, and had not once discovered that she spoke this way. He had received, in those meetings, exactly what he had projected: polite formality, careful social performance. He understood now that she had been matching his register, responding to what he offered rather than offering what she actually was. She was offering it now. "No," he said, "I did not want it. I considered it necessary. That is an honest answer." "You asked for one." "I did." She looked at him. "I did not want it either. I considered it inevitable." A pause. "That is also an honest answer." "Yes," he said, "it is." The fire in the entrance hall had settled into a steady warmth. Outside he could hear the last carriage moving down the drive. So Clara said, "We are 2 people who did not want this and considered it necessary or inevitable, and who are now in it." She looked at him steadily. I think the question of what to do with that is probably more useful than being comfortable. He looked at this woman, this stranger he had married this morning, and felt something shift in his thinking. Not dramatically, not with the fanfare that novels suggested accompanied significant moments. Just a small, genuine movement, the way a door opens slightly when the latch releases. I think, he said, you may be the most direct person I have met in quite some time. Is that a problem? It is not what I expected. No, she said. A small, careful, entirely genuine thing happened at the corner of her mouth. I imagine it is not. The first week at Ravenshire Manor had the quality of two people learning to share a large space without intruding on each other's necessary distances. Adrian maintained his established routine. He rose early, worked in his study for 3 hours before breakfast, spent the morning on estate business with Carrie, took his midday meal at his desk, continued through the afternoon. He had run this schedule for 7 years, and it functioned with the efficiency of a well-maintained machine. Clara was not in any of these spaces, she was everywhere else. He encountered her in the corridors at unexpected times, moving with purpose rather than performance for going somewhere specific, with the quality of someone who had already identified what needed to be done and was in the process of doing it. He encountered her in the breakfast room, where she had arrived before him on 3 consecutive mornings, not to wait for him but because, as he discovered by accident, she was reviewing the household accounts with his housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, asking questions about the management of the domestic staff with the same direct attention she brought to everything else. He mentioned this to Carrie obliquely as they reviewed the week's estate reports. The Duchess has been speaking with Mrs. Poole, he said. Carrie did not look up from the ledger. Yes, Your Grace. About the accounts. Yet, Your Grace, was there a particular reason? Carrie set the ledger down and looked at him with the expression of a man who had managed this estate through 14 years of one difficult situation after another, and had developed an immunity to surprises. She asked Mrs. Poole to walk her through the household budget. Spent about 2 hours on it. She said paused. What did she say? She said she wanted to understand what the house actually costs before she made any decisions about it. He picked the ledger back up. She also noticed that the linen supply is 3 years out of date, and the kitchen has been understaffed since the autumn. She asked me to mention it to you, Your Grace, if it had not already come to your attention. It had not come to his attention. He had been managing the estate accounts for 7 years, and had not noticed that the kitchen was understaffed. Thank you, Carrie, Your Grace. He said nothing further about it. But when he passed Clara in the corridor that afternoon, and she gave him her small, genuine acknowledgement, not overly warm, not formal, simply honest, he stopped. The linen supply, he said. She turned. I asked Carrie to raise it. He did. You are correct, it needs attention. I did not mean to step outside my sphere. She stopped. Started differently, Mrs. Poole is managing this house with inadequate resources and doing it without complaint because she does not want to appear to be criticizing the previous arrangements. I thought someone should know. You are not outside your sphere. He looked at her. You are the Duchess. The house is your sphere. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly more like someone confirming a conclusion they had been uncertain about. All right, she said. All right. I had not been entirely sure you saw it that way. She said it without accusation. Simply honestly, some men in your position prefer the title to be decorative. I have no use for decorative things, he said. She looked at him for a moment, the direct, unperformed look. No, she said. I am beginning to understand that. She continued down the corridor. He stood where he was for a moment, and then he turned and went back to his study, and he sat down at his desk, and he was aware, with the specific discomfort of a man encountering something he did not expect, that the work in front of him was significantly less interesting than the conversation he had just had. The estate records meeting on Friday was the first time Clara sat in on a formal business discussion at Ravenshire. This was not planned. Adrian had been meeting with Carrie in the estate office when Clara appeared in the doorway with a letter she intended to give Carrie. She stopped when she saw the meeting in progress and began to withdraw. Adrian, without thinking about it, said, "Please come in." She came in. She sat in the chair near the window and read her letter while he and Carrie continued working through the quarterly accounts. Or he assumed she was reading her letter. What she was actually doing, he realized approximately 20 minutes into the meeting, was listening. He did not say anything about this. The meeting continued. Carrie presented the figures on the North Field tenant farms a persistent problem. The drainage on those fields inadequate for the past 2 seasons. The yield declining. The tenants frustrated. Adrian knew the situation. He had been managing it for 2 years with a combination of partial measures that were not working. There was a silence in the meeting, during which he and Carrie were both quietly acknowledging that they did not have a solution. Clara looked up from her letter. "My father's estate had a similar problem," she said. In the North Fields near the old mill, the drainage issue was in the distribution. Rather than the volume, the main channel was blocked about a quarter mile from the field itself, so the water backed up rather than moving through. Adrian looked at her. "The tenants kept asking for work on the field itself," she continued. "But the problem was the channel. Once that was cleared, the drainage resolved within 1 season." She went back to her letter. He looked at Carrie. Carrie looked at him. "Have we assessed the main channel?" Adrian said. Carrie's expression communicated that they had not assessed the main channel. Adrian picked up his pen. "Schedule it for next week. Full assessment of the channel from source to field." "Yes, Your Grace." Adrian looked at Clara. She was reading her letter with complete focus, as though she had not just contributed something that might resolve a 2-year problem. "Thank you," he said. She looked up. "It may not be the same issue." "No, but it is worth examining." She nodded and looked back at her letter. He had 30 years of experience managing this estate. She had been here 1 week. He sat with the specific discomfort of someone whose categories have been rearranged without warning, and he tried to identify what he was actually feeling about that. He thought it was somewhere between unsettled and interested, which was not a combination he had experienced with any frequency. The Sunday service at the village church was the first public appearance they made together since the wedding. The church was small, the kind that served a working community rather than a performing one. Adrian had attended it his entire life, with the reliability of someone who understood that a duke who supported his village community was doing what a duke was supposed to do. He had never thought of it as anything beyond duty. Clara sat beside him in the Whitmore pew. After the service, the vicar received them at the door. There were the expected introductions, the expected pleasant exchanges with the families who attended. Adrian did this with his established efficiency, moving through the social obligation with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it since childhood. He became aware at some point that he had finished his portion of the social rounds, and Clara had not. She was still in the churchyard, speaking with a woman he recognized as Mrs. Holt, the wife of one of the tenant farmers on the North Field, a woman whose family had been at Ravenshire for 3 generations, and who had, in Adrian's experience, never exchanged more than 5 words with any Whitmore in that entire span. She was speaking with Clara with the ease of someone who had been waiting for this conversation without knowing they were waiting for it. He watched them. He could not hear what was being said. He could see Mrs. Holt's expression, guarded at first, then opening slightly, then doing something he had not seen it do in 35 years of passing her family on the estate grounds. She was talking about something that mattered to her, to someone who was listening. Clara said something and touched the older woman's hand briefly, without performance. Mrs. Holt nodded. They parted. Clara crossed the churchyard toward him with the particular walk she had, purposeful, unhurried, not performing the walk but simply doing it. She lost her youngest child 3 years ago, Clara said when she reached him. Her middle daughter married last year, but lives too far away to visit often. She manages the household alone because her husband's back has limited his work since the autumn. Adrian looked at her. "How do you know all of this?" I asked her. She looked at him with what was becoming her characteristic directness. "She lives on your estate, Adrian. She has done so her whole life." Did you not know her situation? He had not known her situation. He had known her name. He had known her family had been tenants for 3 generations. He had known in the abstract that the tenant families had individual circumstances that varied. He had not known the specific weight of Mrs. Holt's days. "No," he said. Clara looked at him not with judgment, which was what he braced for, but with something more careful. The look of someone taking an accurate measurement. "You are not unkind," she said finally. "You simply do not look." The directness of it should have been offensive. He waited for the offense to arrive, and it did not. "No," he said, "I do not." She looked at the churchyard, at the families making their way to their carriages, at the vicar speaking with a small cluster of men near the gate, at the particular quality of a Sunday morning in winter, when everyone has chosen to be somewhere together. "It is not a criticism," she said. "I am simply trying to understand how you see things, so that I understand what I am working with." "What you are working with," he repeated. "What we are working with," she said, "if you are willing." He looked at this woman, 1 week his wife, still in most meaningful senses a stranger, but increasingly a stranger with the quality of something essential. The thing you did not know was missing until the specific gap was pointed out. "I am willing," he said. Something moved through her expression, small, careful, but genuine. "Good," she said. She walked toward the carriage. He followed. And for the first time since his father died, and left him the title, and the obligation, and the carefully managed life, he walked toward something without knowing entirely what it was, and found that he was not afraid of not knowing. That in itself was something new. The evening of the 8th day was when everything changed. He was in the study at 10 o'clock, working through correspondence that could reasonably have waited until morning, but that he had used, for several years, as a reason to remain at his desk until the house was fully quiet. Clara had retired at 9. The house was still. He heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Clara's, these were faster, uneven, with the quality of urgency. He set down his pen and had his hand on the study door before the knock came. Davy stood in the corridor, and his expression was wrong. Not the careful professional composure of a man managing his employer's household, but the expression underneath it, the human one. The one that appeared only when something was genuinely wrong. "Your Grace," Davy said. "It is Mrs. Holt. Her husband, the physician, has been sent for, but the roads are—" "Which road?" The North. Adrian moved. He was down the corridor, calling for Carrie, calling for the horse, before he fully registered that he had already made the decision. He knew what he knew about the situation, the back, the winter conditions, a man alone at the limits of what he could manage, and his body had determined what came next before his mind had caught up. He was pulling on his coat in the entrance hall when Clara appeared at the top of the stairs. She took one look at him. "What has happened?" "One of the tenant farmers. His wife indicated this morning that his back—" "Wait." She was already moving down the stairs. "I am coming. Clara, the physician, will take an hour to reach the North Farms in these conditions. I know basic medical care. My mother insisted on it." She reached the bottom of the stairs and looked at him directly. "You can waste time arguing with me, or we can go." He looked at his wife. He went. They rode to the North Farm in conditions that the groom had, with considerable understatement, called challenging the road, iced in sections, the dark complete, the horses working hard. Clara rode with the same unhurried competence she brought to everything, without complaint, without drama. When they arrived, the situation was serious but manageable. George Holt had collapsed the back, as feared, combined with the cold and insufficient rest, and the specific stubbornness of a man who had been managing longer than he should have managed. Mrs. Holt met them at the door with the expression of someone who had been alone with a crisis, and had not let it defeat her, but had very much needed someone to arrive. Clara went directly to the man. Adrian watched her work, calm, efficient, asking the right questions, her hands steady and her voice entirely without the panic that the situation might reasonably have produced in someone untrained. She got the man warm. She identified what was immediate and what was not. She told Mrs. Holt, in clear and specific terms, what needed to happen before the physician arrived and what could wait. Mrs. Holt listened. She followed the instructions with the ease of someone who had found, in crisis, the specific quality of a person she could trust. Adrian stood in the room and was useless in a way he had not been useless in years. He had responded to the emergency with everything he had, and everything he had consisted of his presence and his authority, neither of which were what this situation needed. What this situation needed was what Clara was providing: competence, steadiness, practical knowledge put to immediate use. He stayed. He carried things when asked. He kept the fire built up. He did the necessary small works of being present in an emergency without being its center. The physician arrived an hour later. By then the crisis had been managed. They rode back to Ravenshire Manor at past midnight. The road was quiet and cold, and Clara rode beside him without speaking. And he did not speak either, because there was something he was trying to work out, and he needed the quiet to do it. He had married her because she was appropriate, because she was the correct choice, because the situation required a duchess, and she was a suitable candidate. In 8 days, she had identified a staffing problem he had not noticed, contributed to a 2-year estate problem he had not solved, known the private circumstances of a tenant family he had never asked about, and ridden out at 10 o'clock on an iced road to manage medical emergency that he had not been equipped to manage alone. He had spent 13 years believing he managed Ravenshire. He was beginning to understand that he had been managing the visible portion of it and calling it whole. They reached the manor. He helped her down from the horse. She took his hand without ceremony and stepped down, and the cold air was between them, and the torches at the entrance were ahead of them. And she looked tired and entirely composed, and he could not. At this moment, think of a single person in his life who would have done what she had done tonight without being asked. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "For tonight," he said. "You do not need to thank me." She looked at the entrance. "They are your tenants. Whatever affects them affects Ravenshire." A pause. "And they are people. That requires no other justification." She walked inside. He stood for a moment in the cold, with the sound of the horses being led to the stable and the light from the entrance warming the stone. And he thought about a woman who asked direct questions and noticed staffing problems and knew the names of tenant wives and rode out in the dark without being asked. He thought about what it would mean to actually look at the estate, at the people on it, at the life he had been managing so efficiently from the outside for 13 years. He thought about his ancestors in the portraits, with their composed expressions and their preparation. He went inside, and somewhere between the entrance hall and the stairs, he made a decision that he did not fully recognize as a decision, yet the way the most significant choices sometimes arrive, not with the weight of deliberation, but with the quiet certainty of something that has simply become true. He was going to learn to look, whatever that cost him, whatever it required. He was going to learn to see what was actually here. Starting with the woman who had married him, not because she wanted to, and not because she had to, but because she had assessed the situation with the same honest attention she gave everything, and had decided it was possible to make something real of it. She deserved at least as much honesty in return. He took the stairs one at a time. Above him, in the room that was now hers, a light was still burning. He stopped on the landing and looked at it, the thin line of gold at the bottom of the door, and felt something he had not felt about any room in this house in longer than he could accurately remember. He felt for the first time in 13 years of managing this estate alone that he did not want to be on the other side of that door from whatever was happening inside it. He stood there. He did not knock, but he stood there longer than a man with no feeling about the matter would have stood, and when he finally went to his own room and settled into the dark and the quiet of another night at Ravenshire, the last thing he was aware of was not the estate accounts, or the drainage problem, or the outstanding correspondence. It was the light, still burning, and the woman who had not in 8 days asked him for a single thing except honesty. He thought he could manage that. He thought, if he was careful about it, and did not do what he always did, which was to protect himself from anything he could not fully control, he might manage considerably more than that. Outside, the winter dark pressed against the windows of Ravenshire Manor, and the fire in the grate burned down to its embers. And somewhere in the still house a clock marked midnight with the unhurried patience of things that have been doing the same thing for a very long time. Adrian Whitmore closed his eyes. He did not sleep immediately. He was not used to sleeping when his mind was this awake. The channel assessment on the North Fields confirmed what Clara had suggested. Carrie brought the report to Adrian on a Tuesday morning, set it on the desk with the particular economy of a man who did not enjoy admitting he had missed something for 2 years, and said, "Blockage approximately 300 yards north of the main field boundary. Accumulated debris from the autumn floods. Should have been caught in the seasonal inspection." "It was not," Adrian said. "No, Your Grace, clear it." "Yes, Your Grace." Carrie picked up the report, paused. The Duchess was correct. "Yes, Adrian, she was." Carrie left. Adrian sat at his desk for a moment and thought about about the specific quality of being correct about something you had identified in passing, in a meeting you had not been invited to, on your first week in a house that was not yet your home. He thought about how Clara had offered it, and then returned to her letter as though it were nothing. As though the contribution of a useful thing was simply what you did when you had a useful thing to offer. He had known men, important men, powerful men who would have turned that moment into a display. Who would have waited for acknowledgement, waited for the credit to land properly, waited for the room to confirm that they had been smart. Clara had gone back to her letter. He picked up his pen and went back to work, and he was aware that the work was slightly less sufficient than it had been before she arrived. Which was not a comfortable awareness for a man who had relied on work to fill most of the available space in his life for 13 years. The house had changed, not dramatically, not in ways that a visitor would have noticed. But Adrian noticed because he had lived in this house long enough to know its rhythms, and the rhythms had shifted. There was more sound in the mornings, not noise, but the particular sound of a house that is occupied by someone who is genuinely doing things, rather than maintaining appearances. Clara's voice in the kitchen corridor asking Mrs. Poole a specific question about the weekly provisioning. The sound of a door opening at an unexpected hour because she had decided something needed attending to and had gone to attend to it. The servants noticed. He could see it in the small adjustments, the way Davies moved slightly differently through the house, with less of the careful invisibility of someone managing a principal who was difficult to read. The way Mrs. Poole had stopped holding herself at the particular angle of a woman who was waiting to be told she was doing something wrong. The way the housemaids had begun, on 2 separate occasions, to laugh at something in the corridor, a real sound, surprised out of them before catching themselves and returning to professional quiet. The house was, he realized, relaxing. He was not sure how he felt about this. He raised it, obliquely, in the Tuesday evening conversation that had become their established pattern. They took tea in the sitting room after dinner. Not by agreement exactly, but by the accumulated weight of it happening twice, and then becoming the thing that happened. He said the staff seemed comfortable. Clara set her teacup down. Is that a problem? No, he considered. I was observing it. You observe a great deal. She said, particular weight, just accurate. I am trying to understand how you do it, he said. The ease with which people seem to... He stopped, which was unusual for him. He generally knew what he meant to say. People respond to you differently than they respond to the role you hold. That is not common, she looked at him. And how do people respond to you? He thought about Mrs. Holt and her guarded expression. He thought about the servants moving with the careful invisibility of people managing someone difficult to read. He thought about 35 years of being the Duke first, and the man somewhere much further back. Correctly, he said. That must be very lonely, Clara said. He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze without apology. I am not criticizing, I am observing. You asked how I notice people. Part of how I notice people is that I try to say true things when they are relevant. A pause. Is it? He could deflect this. He had deflected things of this nature his entire life, with a particular efficiency that left the other person feeling they had been answered without having received any actual information. He did it automatically, almost without thinking, whenever a conversation moved toward territory that felt exposed. He sat for a moment and let the deflection go unperformed. Yes, he said often. She looked at him for a moment. Not with the sympathy that would have made him close immediately. With something that was simply honest, the look of one person hearing another person's true answer. Thank you for telling me, she said. Then she picked up her book and returned to it, and the conversation moved on, and he sat with the specific strangeness of having said a true thing to someone, and not had it used against him. He picked up his own reading. The fire settled. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when 2 people have reached the particular stage of shared space, where silence is comfortable rather than requiring management. He noticed this too. He had not before Clara known this kind of silence in this house. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Adrian recognized the handwriting on the outside before he opened it, his cousin Frederick's elaborate script, which had not improved since childhood. He opened it at his desk, expecting the usual combination of social commentary and gentle impertinence that Frederick delivered with the regularity and affection of someone who considered himself Adrian's most honest observer. What he read instead made him put the letter down. Frederick wrote as Frederick always wrote, without particular ceremony. He had been at Lord Pemberton's estate over the weekend. He had spoken with Pemberton's son Rupert, who was recently returned from London. Rupert had been at his club the previous Tuesday, where he had heard a conversation between Lord Ashford, Clara's father, and a man Frederick did not recognize but described in specific enough physical terms that Adrian could narrow the field considerably. The conversation had concerned the Ravenshire match. Lord Ashford had expressed relief. He had described the arrangement in terms that Frederick, who had a talent for remembering conversations verbatim, reproduced faithfully. It was, Ashford had said, rather better than he had hoped for, given what they had been managing with Clara. The man had said, "What have you been managing?" And Ashford had said, "Well, she has always been difficult. Particular. The suitors who came found her challenging. She asks too many questions. She has opinions. It was beginning to be a problem. But Whitmore is steady and doesn't want sentiment from a marriage, so she should do well enough there." Frederick's letter contained one more paragraph. He wrote, "I tell you this not to cause trouble, but because you deserve to know what people are saying. And also because I have now met your wife twice, and I think Lord Ashford has badly misread his own daughter, and I thought you should know both things." Adrian set the letter down. He sat for a long moment. Difficult, particular, asks too many questions, has opinions. Beginning to be a problem. He sat with this and examined it honestly, the way he tried to examine everything. Clara did ask questions. She asked them directly, without performance, because she wanted accurate information and found it more efficient to request it than to work around its absence. She had opinions. She expressed them to the people whose decisions they were relevant to carry, about the channel, to Mrs. Poole, about the staffing, to him, about everything she had observed in her first 2 weeks in this house. These were not faults. He did not experience them as faults. He experienced them as useful, as the specific quality of a person who engaged with the world rather than managing the world's impression of her. He thought about how long she must have lived inside a family that experienced her as a problem to be managed. He thought about the question she had asked him on their wedding day. "Did you want this?" Said without self-pity, without drama, with the clean directness of someone who had learned not to expect warmth and was asking for honesty instead, because honesty was more reliable. He picked up the letter, folded it, and put it in the bottom drawer of his desk. He did not intend to tell her about it. He would change his mind about this within 48 hours, but he did not know that yet. The dinner party happened because Lady Caldwell invited them, and refusing Lady Caldwell was something that required a social calculation Adrian was not prepared to make in his 3rd week of marriage. Lady Caldwell was a woman of 60 who had been managing the social architecture of the county for 30 years, with the efficiency of someone who had decided early that the most useful skill in her position was knowing everything. About everyone before they knew it about themselves. She had approved of the Ravenshire match, which meant she had approved of it publicly and frequently, which meant that refusing her first invitation would be interpreted as either an insult or a problem. They went. The party was 12 people, the correct size for a dinner, at which information would be exchanged under the guise of social pleasantry. Adrian knew most of them. Clara knew none of them, which he mentioned in the carriage, and which she received without apparent concern. "I will manage," she said. "I know you will," he said. "I was not worried about you." She turned to look at him. "I was noting it," he said, "because these particular people will have already formed opinions, based on what they have been told, and what they have been told may not," he stopped. "May not be accurate," she said, "about me?" He looked at her. "Frederick wrote to me. He heard a conversation. I should have told you sooner." He told her. She listened to the full account without interruption. Her expression did not collapse. It did not perform the elaborate emotional theater that the information might have earned from someone with less control over their own center of gravity. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father has always found me inconvenient. Clara, I am not being self-pitying. I am being accurate." She looked at him steadily. "He loves me. I believe that. But I have always understood that the love and the inconvenience existed simultaneously, and that on certain days one outweighed the other. A pause. Difficult, particular. That is his vocabulary for a daughter who did not become what he expected. "It is not mine," Adrian said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. "I want to say that clearly. Whatever word he uses for the qualities you have, those qualities are not. They are not problems in this house." Something moved through her expression. Small, quick, carefully managed, but he caught it. The specific movement of someone receiving something they had not known they were waiting to receive. "Thank you," she said quietly. The carriage arrived at Caldwell House. They went in together, and the evening proceeded in the way that evenings of this type proceeded, with its careful social choreography and its layers of observed and unobserved information. Adrian moved through the room with his established efficiency, managing the expected conversations, tracking the dynamics with the attention of someone who had been reading social shrooms since childhood. He was also tracking Clara. She was composed. She was direct when people spoke to her, in the way that could not be called rude, because there was no hostility in it, just the specific quality of someone who did not pretend. Lady Caldwell herself spent 20 minutes with Clara at the far end of the sitting room, and Adrian could see, from across the room, that Lady Caldwell was doing her characteristic information gathering, and that Clara was not giving her what she was looking for. Not through evasion. Through the simple act of saying true things, which were much less useful to a woman who collected secrets than things that people felt they were admitting. At dinner, Clara was seated beside a man named Ashworth, a neighbor of the Caldwells, unmarried, with the expression of a man who had found most women easily managed and was encountering something new. Adrian was close enough to hear portions of the exchange. Ashworth said something about women and the natural limits of their interest in estate management. Clara said, "What limits do you mean specifically?" Ashworth explained at some length what limits he meant. His explanation contained several assumptions that did not survive contact with evidence. Clara said, "My husband's Northfield drainage problem was unresolved for 2 years. It was identified and solved in the first week. I mentioned it." The table had gone slightly quiet around them. Ashworth said, with the smile of a man attempting to recover, "Well, that is very capable of you." Clara said, "Thank you, I thought so too." She returned to her dinner. The quiet around the table reorganized itself in the particular way it does when a social exchange has produced a result that nobody was prepared for and that everyone will discuss at length afterward. Adrian, who had been managing his expression with the professionalism of 13 years of practice, kept his face entirely neutral and thought that Frederick, if he had been present, would have found the moment very entertaining. Lady Caldwell, from the other end of the table, caught Adrian's eye. She gave him a look that contained, in the compressed efficiency of a woman who communicated volumes without language, something that translated approximately as, "Where have you been hiding her?" He picked up his wineglass. In the carriage home, Clara was quiet for a long time. He let her be. He had learned, in 3 weeks, that her silences were not performances. They were simply the spaces in which she was actually thinking, and interrupting them produced less useful results than waiting. Eventually she said, "I was perhaps too direct with Ashworth." "You were accurate," Adrian said. "Accuracy is sometimes the same thing as directness." "I know," he looked at her. "You are not concerned about Ashworth's opinion." "No," she looked at her hands. "I am concerned about your sense." He was quiet for a moment. "Why? Because these are your people. This is your county. What I say and how I say it reflects on you." She looked at him. "I do not wish to create problems for you in a room I have only just entered." He thought about this carefully before he answered, because it deserved a careful answer. "I have managed the opinions of that room for 35 years, he said. "I am not concerned about Ashworth." A pause. "And I would not want you to manage yourself into someone you are not because you are concerned about the room I can handle." She looked at him for a moment in the arc of the carriage. That is, she stopped, started differently. "That is a generous thing to say." "It is an honest thing," he said. "I try to keep them the same." Sodoin. I know something settled between them, not a resolution of anything actually, but the specific quality of 2 people who have been parallel to each other for several weeks and have moved, without either of them arranging it, into something closer to alignment. She turned back to the window. He turned back to his thoughts. Outside, the county moved past in the winter dark, and inside the carriage it was warm. and he was aware of the specific fact that he was not in a hurry for them to arrive home. That was new. The 18th day was when he made his first serious mistake. He did not recognize it as a mistake at the time. He recognized it as a decision, which was different, and a decision taken for reasons that seemed, in the moment, entirely correct. His mother's family had left a collection of jewelry to the estate pieces that had been in the Whitmore family for generations, kept in the estate safe, brought out for occasions of sufficient significance. They had not been brought out since his mother's death. He had not thought about them particularly. They existed. They were catalogued. They were part of the estate's holdings, and they required no management beyond existing. When Lady Caldwell sent a note 3 days after the dinner, indicating that she was planning a formal ball, and that the event would be attended by families of the first consequence, Adrian looked at the note and thought about what Clara would wear to an event of this standing. He thought about the ivory dress, correct, elegant, her own, and then he thought about the collection in the safe, and he thought about what it meant to walk into a room of the first consequence as the Duchess of Ravenshire. He asked Davies to bring the collection up. He had them laid out in his study. He selected 3 pieces: a necklace, a bracelet, earrings, all matched, sapphires and diamonds, the most significant formal set in the collection, worth more than most of the families in the county would see in a decade. He brought them to Clara in the sitting room that evening. He set the case on the table between them. She opened it. She looked at the pieces for a long moment, then she looked at him. "They are beautiful," she said. "They were my mother's. The family's properly, but available to you now, appropriate to your position." A silence. "I see," Clara said. Something had shifted in her voice. He noticed it and did not immediately understand it. "For the Caldwell ball," he said, "the collection is significant. It would be expected at an event of that standing." "Expected," she repeated. He looked at her. "It is appropriate for the Duchess." "Adrian." She closed the case. "Are you concerned that I will embarrass you at the Caldwell ball?" He stopped. He replayed the last 3 minutes and heard them differently than he had when he was inside them. The conversation about the county room at the dinner. His reassurance that he could handle what they thought. Her dress and what it did and did not signal about her standing. The jewelry case appearing in the sitting room 2 days later. He heard how it sounded. "That is not..." He stopped. Started honestly. "No, I did not mean it as that." "What did you mean it as?" "I wanted you to have... I thought it was appropriate for you to have access to things that are available to you. That belonged to your position." Clara looked at him steadily. Not with anger. He could have managed anger, with something quieter and more specific. "Do you think I need the jewelry to be adequate to the position?" "No. Do you think the room will see me differently because of what I am wearing?" "Yes," he said. "Honestly, yes. That is the nature of those rooms. And you want them to see me in a particular way." He sat with this. He was not sure what he wanted exactly, and the process of not being sure was uncomfortable. "I wanted to give you something, for the ball." He looked at the case. "I executed it badly." She was quiet for a moment. "You did," she said. "Yes, the giving was kind. The reasoning behind it was..." She paused. "Was that of a man who is more accustomed to managing a situation than to giving a gift." He looked at her. She was right, precisely, and without flattery, and she had said it in the tone of someone who was correcting a mistake, rather than cataloging a character flaw. "I will learn the difference," he said. "I think you will." She looked at the case. "They are genuinely beautiful. They are yours. I would prefer them to be offered and chosen, rather than placed and presented." "Then I am offering them." She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the case again and looked at the pieces properly, not performing appreciation now, but actually looking. She picked up the earrings and held them in the light. She set them down and looked at the necklace. "The earrings," she said finally. "And perhaps the bracelet. Not all 3. That would be more than me." "More than you. I do not mean my worth, I mean my style." She looked up at him. "I am not someone who needs all 3. He understood what she meant. He understood it with a clarity that told him something about what he was learning, to see that the woman in front of him knew exactly who she was and wore it consistently, and that the jewelry that suited her was the piece that accompanied, rather than announced, because she did not require announcement. "The earrings and bracelet," he agreed. "Good." She closed the case. Then she looked at him. "Thank you for the gift." "Thank you," he said, "for the correction. The smallest thing happened at the corner of her mouth. You are the only man I have ever known who thanked someone for being corrected. I have found it useful, he said. So have I. The small thing at her mouth completed itself, and for a moment in the sitting room with the fire going and the jewelry case between them, she simply looked like herself. Unguarded, warm, present, he felt the room contract slightly around that moment. He filed it in the place where he had been putting the other things, the things he did not yet know what to do with. The things that were accumulating in the part of himself that had been empty for a long time, and was now filling with something he did not have a comfortable name for. The Caldwell Ball was a formal exhibition of precisely the county hierarchy that Adrian had been navigating his entire life, and he walked into it with Clara beside him and felt, for the first time, the difference between attending an event and arriving at one. She wore the ivory gown and the earrings and the bracelet, and she moved through the room with the same quality she brought to everything: purposeful, present, entirely herself. He watched people recalibrate as she spoke with them. Not because she performed, because she didn't. Lady Caldwell pulled him aside within the first hour. "Your Duchess," she said, in the direct way that 30 years of social management had earned her, "is not what I expected." "No," he said. "Ashworth has already told 3 people she humiliated him at dinner." She asked him a question he couldn't answer. "Yes." Lady Caldwell looked at Clara across the room. "She'll make enemies. She'll make fewer enemies than she'll make allies," Adrian said. Lady Caldwell looked at him. "You sound certain of that." "I am becoming certain of a number of things," he said, and went to find his wife. He found her near the far end of the room, in conversation with 2 women he did not immediately recognize younger than Clara, with the particular expression of people who have found someone worth talking to and are engaged in the genuine pleasure of it. He heard fragments as he approached. Clara speaking about the estate, about the work she had been doing with Mrs. Poole, about the drainage problem on the North Fields. Not performing the information, simply sharing it, because she found it interesting and these women were interested. He stopped a few steps away and listened. One of the women said, "You speak about the estate management as though you are actually involved in it." Clara said, "I am." "The why wouldn't duchesses?" "I am not most douches," Clara said. Then, without missing a beat, "My husband is of the same mind, which helps considerably." She turned slightly and saw him standing there. Something moved through her expression, a quick, unguarded moment, of something that might have been warmth if it had been given room to land properly. He stepped forward. "Your Grace," one of the women said, straightening. "Ladies." He took his place beside Clara, close, the natural distance of 2 people who are used to sharing a space, and looked at her. "Mrs. Poole has been looking for you. Something about the linen order." "At a ball? She found me in the corridor. I told her I would relay it." Clara gave him the look of someone who recognized very clearly that he had invented this reason to come and collect her from a conversation she was enjoying, and who was going to address this later. "Thank you," she said, and said her farewells to the women, and fell into step beside him. They moved through the room. "Mrs. Poole," she said quietly, "has not been looking for me." "No." "Then why?" "Because Ashworth is heading in that direction," he said, "and has been drinking since 9 o'clock, and I thought you might prefer to be elsewhere when he arrives." Clara looked at him. He kept his eyes forward. She paused. "That is genuinely kind. I try occasionally." She laughed, a short, real sound surprised out of her. He had not heard her laugh before. The sound of it did something to the composition of the room around him, reorganized it slightly, shifted the light, and he was aware, walking beside her through the crowd, that he was paying less attention to the room than he had ever paid to a room in his life. She collected herself. "Thank you. You are welcome." They continued through the ball. At some point, he was not certain of the exact moment, his hand found the small of her back. Not dramatically, not with intent. Simply there, the natural pressure of a person navigating a crowd and keeping someone close. She did not step away. The evening continued. And somewhere in the space between the arrival and the return journey, Adrian Whitmore stopped thinking of his wife as a decision he had made, and started thinking of her as a person he was learning, with the specific, genuine interest of someone who has found unexpectedly that the book they picked up out of obligation is the one they cannot put down. He had no framework for what to do with this. He had spent 35 years building a framework for everything. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the absence of one felt less like a problem and more like the beginning of something worth the uncertainty. He held that. On the way home, Clara fell asleep in the carriage. He noticed this without drawing attention to it. She leaned against the side panel, her head at an angle that would give her a stiff neck in the morning. And she slept with the complete unconsciousness of someone who had given a great deal of herself to the evening and had nothing left to guard with. He watched her, not with the cataloging attention he brought to problems. With something quieter than that, something he did not have a name for yet. At the manor, he woke her gently her name, twice, quietly, and she surfaced with the brief disorientation of someone unused to sleeping in carriages, and then gathered herself with her characteristic efficiency. "I fell asleep," she said. "You did. I apologize." "You don't need to." She looked at him for a moment, in the dark of the stopped carriage, and there was something in her face half asleep, unmanaged, the social composure not yet fully reassembled, that he thought was the most honest he had seen her. "The most present Adrian," she said. Yes, she seemed to be working towards something. He waited. I think she stopped, looked at her hands. "I think this is going to be all right." She looked back up at him. "I did not know that when I came here. I thought I would manage, and it would be livable. But I think it may be." She stopped again. "More than livable," he offered. Yes, simply directly, more than livable. He looked at her. He thought about difficult and particular, and beginning to be a problem, and about the specific narrowness of vision required to look at this woman and see a problem rather than a person. "Yes," he said, "I think it may be." The door opened. The night was cold. They went inside together, and the manor received them with the warmth of a house that had learned, in 3 weeks, to expect them. The morning after the Caldwell ball, Adrian found Clara already at the breakfast table, with 3 letters open beside her plate and a 4th in her hand. He sat down. Davies poured his coffee without being asked. Clara looked up briefly, acknowledged him with the specific warmth that had become their morning register, not elaborate, not performed, simply genuine, and returned to the letter. "Anything of significance?" he asked. "2 are invitations. One is from my mother." She set the 4th letter down. "And one is from Lady Caldwell." He reached for the coffee. "What does Lady Caldwell want?" "To offer me a position on the charitable committee for the county hospital." Clara set the letter beside her plate and looked at it. She was apparently impressed by something I said at the ball. "She wants someone who will," I believe the phrase she used was, "ask the questions nobody else is willing to ask." That sounds accurate to your capabilities. It sounds like she wants someone to do the uncomfortable work while she anges the credit. Clara said it without bitterness, just precision. Though I think she would also genuinely support the work itself. "She is not a simple woman." "No," Adrian said, "she is not." "I think I should accept." He looked at her, then accept. She looked back at the letter. "I wanted to consult you. These events, the committee meetings, the social obligations that come with it, they will require time. And they are not without social consequence. Lady Caldwell moves in specific circles, and being associated with her work positions me." "Clara." He waited until she looked at him. "Accept the committee position. The consequence of being publicly associated with hospital charitable work is not something I need to manage." She studied him for a moment. "You mean that?" "I consistently mean what I say." "I know." The small thing at the corner of her mouth. "I am still adjusting to it." She wrote back to Lady Caldwell before noon. The committee met for the first time 2 weeks later, and Clara came home from it at 4:30 with the particular energy of someone who had spent 3 hours doing something that genuinely engaged her. Adrian was in the study when he heard her in the corridor, heard her speaking to Davies about something, heard the direction of her footsteps change, and then approach. She knocked once and came in without waiting, which she had never done before. He looked up. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Sit down." She sat. She had her glove still on, which told him she had come directly here from the entrance hall without stopping. The hospital committee, 3 of the 5 members, have been withholding the financial reports from the other 2. The accounts Lady Caldwell believes are being submitted to the full committee have not been submitted to the full committee. 2 of the 5 people in that room today have never seen an accurate accounting of what has been raised and what has been spent. Adrian set down his pen. How do you know this? Because I asked. She pulled off her gloves. I asked to see the annual account. The 3 members who control the books said it would be circulated before the next meeting. The other 2 looked at each other in a way that told me they had been told this before. And had not received it, and had not received it. She looked at him steadily. There may be a perfectly innocent explanation. Poor organization. Miscommunication. But Adrian, I am looking at this and I am seeing a pattern I recognize, and I think someone needs to see the actual accounts before the next meeting. He had been managing estates and their associated social structures for 13 years. He recognized what she was describing. Is Lady Caldwell aware? Lady Caldwell believes the committee is functioning correctly. She is not a woman who involves herself in the detail of the accounts. She raises the money and she trusts the management. Clara paused. She trusts incorrectly, I think. He leaned back in his chair. What do you need from me? She looked at him. Access to someone who understands charitable accounts. Someone who can look at what is there, if I can get access to what is there, and tell me what I am actually seeing. My solicitor can do that. Will he do it quietly? Yes, she breathed. Then that. I need that. He looked at his wife, this woman who had walked into a committee meeting on her first day and identified something that had apparently escaped notice for considerably longer. He thought about difficult and particular. He thought about what it cost to call that a problem. I will write to Hatch today, he said. Thank you. She stood. I know this is, she stopped. This is your work. You identified it. You brought it correctly. There is nothing to apologize for. She looked at him for a moment. I am not apologizing, she said. I am thanking you. Then you are welcome. She left. He picked up his pen and began the letter to Hatch. 3 days later, the problem with the committee accounts became significantly more complicated. Hatch came to the manor personally, which was itself information. He did not make personal calls for straightforward matters. Adrian received him in the study. Clara joined them at Adrian's indication, because she had initiated this, and she deserved to be in the room where it was resolved. Hatch was a careful man who communicated bad news, the way a physician communicated a difficult diagnosis with precision and without unnecessary softening, because he understood that the softening was usually for his own comfort rather than the patient's. He said, the charitable hospital account, as managed by the committee, has received contributions totaling approximately £900 over the past 3 years. Current balance, as I was able to determine through the registrar's office, is approximately £240. Adrian said, and the difference spent. Hatch adjusted his papers. Some of it on legitimate committee expenses, meeting costs, printing, the annual charity dinner. That accounts for perhaps £120. He paused. The remaining £540 is less clearly accounted for. There are payments to 2 entities I cannot identify with certainty. The names on the records are not impossible, but unusual for this type of charitable work. Clara said, whose names? Hatch looked at her. The names on the payment records are Lord Pembury and a Mr. Sheridan. He paused again. Lord Pembury is one of the 5 committee members. Silence. Clara's expression did not collapse. It did something much more controlled. It went very still, in the way of someone who has confirmed a suspicion they wished had been wrong. He has been paying himself, she said. It was not a question. The payments are structured to obscure it, Hatch said. But in substance, yes, that appears to be the case. Adrian looked at his wife. She was looking at the table in front of her, with the expression of someone processing something unpleasant, while deciding what the correct response to it was. Pembury is a friend of Lady Caldwell's husband, Adrian said. Yes, Hatch said, which is how he joined the committee. I assume so, Your Grace. Clara looked up. Lady Caldwell does not know. I believe that is correct, Hatch said. Lady Caldwell would not, in my assessment of her, knowingly have permitted this. No, Clara said, she would not. She looked at Adrian. She needs to be told. Yes, I need to be the one to tell her. He looked at her. Clara, she invited me to the committee. She trusted me with this work. Her voice was steady. Certain, if someone else tells her, she will hear about it secondhand, and she will hear about her own mistake secondhand, and she will spend the rest of our association, which I would like to continue, wondering what I knew and when and why I chose not to come to her directly. She looked at him with the complete composure of someone who has thought this through and arrived. I am going to Caldwell House tomorrow. He held her gaze. He thought about the woman who had asked him, on their wedding day, whether he wanted to be honest with each other. He thought about 3 weeks of watching her walk directly into uncomfortable truths, without flinching, without performing, without looking for the easier path. "All right," he said. "You think I should not go?" "I think you should do exactly what you intend to do," he said. "I am simply thinking about whether you should go alone." A beat. "You would come with me," she said, "if you want me there." She looked at him for a moment, the direct, unperformed look. Something moved through it that was different from what he had seen before. Not the careful warmth of two people learning to be in the same space. Something less managed than that. "Yes," she said. "I would like you there." Lady Caldwell received them the following morning with the composed authority of a woman accustomed to people arriving at her door with things to tell her. She had done this for 30 years. She was good at receiving information. She was not, it became clear as Clara laid out what Hatch had found, prepared for this particular information. She listened to the full account without interruption. She asked 3 precise questions about the records, about the timeline, about the amount. Then she was quiet for a long moment. "He has been coming to this house for 20 years, she said finally. Clara said nothing. "My husband considers him a friend." She was not speaking to either of them exactly. She was speaking to the specific air of someone processing, something that had rearranged itself entirely. 20 years, Lady Caldwell, Clara said quietly. "I am sorry." The older woman looked at her. Something shifted in her face, not collapse, not the dramatic rupture of a woman overwhelmed. The specific movement of someone absorbing something real and deciding what to do with it. "You came yourself, yes. You did not send a letter. You did not yet solicitor contact mine. You came, it was my work, it was your trust, it required me to come." Lady Caldwell looked at her for a long moment, then she looked at Adrian. "You know," she said, "when I arranged for you both to be at my dinner, I was curious about your wife. The reports I had received were," she paused, "let us say mixed." "I am aware," Adrian said. "I am no longer curious," Lady Caldwell said. She turned back to Clara. "I know what I need to do. I will need your solicitor's report, if you are willing to share it. And I will need to decide how to proceed with my husband's involvement." "Of course," Clara said. "This will not be quiet." "No," Clara said, "it will not. Pembury has allies in this county. People who have benefited from his alliances. When this becomes known, there will be those who..." She stopped. Looked at Clara directly. "You understand that some of the consequences of this may fall on you. On both of you. People who support Pembury will look for someone to blame. And a new duchess who arrived and immediately disrupted a committee that had been running smoothly for 3 years on the surface at least will be a convenient target." "I know," Clara said, "and you intend to proceed." Lady Caldwell, £540 raised for a hospital. For people who are ill and have no other recourse. She held the older woman's gaze. "Yes, I intend to proceed." Lady Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." She stood, which indicated the meeting was concluded. "I will be in touch with your solicitor before the end of the week." She looked at Adrian. "You chose well, Your Grace, whether you knew it at the time or not." "I did not know it at the time," Adrian said. "I know it now." Lady Caldwell nodded. They left. In the carriage, Clara was very quiet. He let her be. He had learned this. After a while she said, "She will handle it correctly. Yes, Pembury will make noise. Yes, and some of that noise will be directed at me." She said it without self-pity. Simply, as an assessment of the landscape. People who do not like the disruption will decide the disruption is the problem, rather than what it uncovered. "Yes," he said, "that is what people do. I knew it when I went in." "I know you did." She turned to look at him. "Are you, I want to know honestly, are you concerned about the position this places you in? The estate's position? The relationships with certain families that may..." Clara, he looked at her steadily. "I have spent 13 years managing the county's opinion of the Whitmore estate. I can continue to manage it. What you did today was correct." He paused. "I would not want you to have done differently." She looked at him for a long moment. "I need to tell you something," she said. The quality of her voice had changed. This was not the Clara of practical assessments and direct questions. This was something underneath, that something less organized. "Tell me," he said. "When I married you," she said, I had made peace with a particular kind of life. A life where I was useful and competent and managed. where I was the Duchess of Ravenshire, and that was the boundary of what was required of me. She looked at her hands. I had not expected to be. She stopped. He waited. I had not expected to be seen, she said, the way you see things. The way you look at what I do and you do not make it smaller. You do not manage it into a shape that is more convenient. She looked up. My father loved me and found me inconvenient for the same quality. You find usable, he said. She was quiet. I find it essential, he said. Because it was true, and because she had asked for honesty on their wedding day, and he owed her the continued practice of it. What you brought to that room today, what you have brought to every room in this house since you arrived, is not a quality I manage. It is something I had not known this house was missing until it arrived. She looked at him. You are not a convenient wife, he said. You are a correct one. There is a significant difference, and I am aware of it every day. Something broke open in her expression just briefly, just enough. Not the composed Clara of the committee room, or the dinner party, or the carriage home from difficult meetings. The person underneath all of it. The woman who had grown up being told she was too much and had learned to carry that quietly, and had walked into a marriage she had not wanted because she could not imagine being truly wanted. She turned away quickly, but not before he saw it. He did not say anything. He gave her the moment she needed. The carriage moved through the roads, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have just said true things and are letting them settle into the structure of what they are building. After a while she turned back. Her composure was reinstated. But her eyes were slightly brighter than they had been, and she did not pretend otherwise. Thank you, she said. You already thanked me. I am thanking you for a different thing. Then you are welcome, he said, for the different thing. The noise Pembury made was not quiet. It began within a week of Lady Calderwell's formal withdrawal of the committee members and her notification to the county charitable board. It began the way these things began, with conversations at clubs and drawing rooms, with the careful planting of alternative interpretations, with the specific social maneuver of a man who understands he has been caught and is attempting to reframe the catching. The version of events that Pembury circulated was elegant in the way that useful lies are elegant. He had not defrauded the committee. He had redirected funds in ways that were misunderstood. The new Duchess of Ravenshire, ambitious and inexperienced, had interfered in a functioning organization and caused disruption based on a misreading of accounts. The Duke, either complicit or manipulated by his unsuitable wife, had added institutional weight to a campaign based on personal ambition. Frederick arrived at Ravenshire on a Tuesday with the expression of a man carrying something he would rather not be carrying. You need to know what's being said, he told Adrian in the study, without preamble. I know what's being said. The specific version that's circulating Pembury has been to 3 different drawing rooms this week. He's framing Clara as the source of the problem. She's being painted as a woman who came into a community she doesn't understand and dismantled something functional to make a name for herself. Adrian looked at his cousin. And what do the people in those drawing rooms think? Frederick paused, mixed. Some of them know Pembury well enough to be skeptical. Some of them, the ones who have always found the idea of a duchess with opinions uncomfortable, are more receptive. He sat down. The ones who were at the Caldwell dinner, where she asked Ashworth the question he couldn't answer. Some of them are choosing the reading that flatters their prior impression. Which is that she is difficult, yes. Adrian set down the report he had been reviewing and looked at his cousin. Frederick had known him for 35 years. He had seen him manage every significant crisis the estate had produced. He had seen him absorb losses without public display and take difficult decisions without seeking counsel. He had never in 35 years seen Adrian Whitmore uncertain about what to do next. He was not uncertain now. He knew exactly what to do next. The question was whether he would be willing to do it in the way that was required. Where's the next significant social gathering? He asked. Frederick blinked. Lord Harrow is hosting on Friday. Half the county will be there. Why, we will attend, Adrian said. And do what? Be present. He picked up his report again. Both of us, publicly, without apology. Frederick looked at him for a moment. You're not going to defend her to these people. No. Adrian looked up. I am going to appear in that room as a man who stands beside his wife, because she is his wife, and because her work is correct, and I am going to let that be the statement. He paused. They can interpret it as they like. The interpretation has never been the point. Frederick was quiet. Then, 6 weeks ago you told me this marriage was a practical arrangement. Yes, and now? Adrian looked at his cousin. Frederick held up a hand. I'm not. Yes, I understand. He stood. Friday then. He told Clara about Pembury's campaign that evening. He did not soften it. He told her what Frederick had reported, in the same direct way she brought to everything. Because she had asked for honesty on the first day, and he had committed to the practice of it, and he was not going to abandon it, because the honesty was uncomfortable. She listened to the whole account, then she said, "He's calling me ambitious." Among other things, ambitious, she repeated it with the specific quality of someone tasting a word to determine if it fits. As though identifying theft from a charitable account is a social maneuver. That is how he is framing it, and people believe him. Some of them. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to be honest with you about something. He waited. I have spent my entire life, she said, managing the specific fear that people would decide I was too much. That my opinions and my questions and the way I engaged with things would make me impossible. Unacceptable. She looked at him with the complete directness she reserved for things that cost something to say. Father felt it. The men who came to court me felt it. Even here in the first weeks I was calibrating. Watching to see how much was too much. I know, he said. She looked at him. You knew? I noticed when you were calibrating. It looked different from when you weren't. He held her gaze. I did not want you to calibrate. I should have said so sooner. She breathed. Pembury is going to say I am difficult and ambitious and disruptive, and some people are going to choose to believe it, because it is more comfortable than believing that a woman who asks questions and gets correct answers is simply doing what anyone with eyes and integrity would do. Yes, and you want to go to Harrow's gathering on Friday. Yes, to make a statement, to be present, he said. Which is a different thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, not the composed professional Clara, not the direct practical Clara, but the version she kept most carefully, the one that had been built out of years of being told it was too much. If we go, she said carefully, and people choose Pembury's version if being there makes it worse. Clara, he leaned forward, I am asking you to come with me to a gathering at Lord Harrow's house. Not to fight a battle, not to perform a defense, simply to walk into a room with me and exist there together without apology. He looked at her steadily. I am asking you to let me stand beside you. She was very still. That is all, he said, just that. Something happened in her face that he had not seen before, not the quick, guarded movements of a woman managing her own emotions carefully, but the longer, slower movement of something giving way. Not collapsing. You mean it, she said. I consistently mean what I say. The echo of her own words returned to her. She recognized it immediately. You remembered that, she said. I remember most things you say. She looked at him. He held the look without managing it, without pulling back into the controlled distance that had served him for 35 years. Without giving her the composed Duke rather than the man sitting across from her, who had been watching her for 6 weeks, with an attention he did not know what to do with. She was the one who looked away first. She looked at her hands. All right, she said. All right, Friday. She looked back up. We go on Friday, good. She stood to leave, he said, Clara. She turned. The committee was right. What you found was real, and you pursued it correctly, and the people who choose Pembury's version are choosing comfort over truth. He paused. But I want you to know, regardless of what they choose, I know what is true. I have known since the first week. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. Since the first week, she repeated. The North Field Channel, he said. You identified it and returned to your letter. You did not wait to be thanked. He looked at her steadily. That is when I understood what kind of person I had married. The light in her face when he said it, the involuntary, unguarded brightness of someone receiving something true, was the most honest thing he had seen in 35 years of watching people in rooms. She said nothing. She left. He sat alone in the study and felt the room differently than he had felt it an hour ago, charged with the specific aftermath of something significant. The air changed by the presence of what had just been said. Two people standing at the edge of something larger than either of them had intended to approach this quickly. He picked up his pen. He could not work. He set it down. He sat for a long time in the quiet of the house, in the chair that was his, in the study that had been the center of his managed, controlled, efficient life for 13 years. And he thought about a woman who had asked him on their wedding day whether he wanted this, and about the answer he had given, and about how thoroughly and completely wrong he had been. He had not wanted it. He had not known what it was. He knew now, and the knowledge of it, the specific, certain, irreversible knowledge of it, settled into him, the way truth settles when it has been true for a while, and you have finally stopped arguing with it. He wanted it. He wanted her, not the useful wife, not the correct duchess, not the woman who solved estate problems and asked committee questions and rode out in the dark without being asked. All of those things, and the woman underneath them. The one he had been watching slowly emerge for 6 weeks, the one who had been calibrating herself carefully into a manageable version, and whom he had been, without knowing it, giving reasons to stop. He sat in the quiet and held this. Outside, the evening moved toward night, and Ravenshire Manor settled into its sounds, the fire in the next room, the distant activity of the household doing what households did when the day wound toward its end. And from somewhere above him, the sound of footsteps moving through the corridor, purposeful and unhurried. Her step. He listened to it cross above him and continue down the hall and stop. He sat with the specific and unfamiliar weight of a man who has understood something important about himself and does not yet know what to do with the understanding, except to carry it forward. Friday, he thought. They would go on Friday. He could manage until Friday. He was less certain of this than he would have been 6 weeks ago. Lord Harrow's gathering was not a ball. It was worse than a ball, a dinner party for 40, which meant a room small enough that everyone could see exactly where everyone else stood, literally and otherwise. A ball allowed for strategic positioning, for the circulation that let people manage their associations. A dinner party for 40 put you at a table and left you there, visible, for 3 hours. Adrian knew this when he accepted the invitation. He accepted it anyway. They arrived at precisely the correct time, not early, which would have signaled anxiety, not late, which would have signaled avoidance. Clara wore the ivory gown again, the earrings and the bracelet, and she walked through the door with the quality he had come to understand was simply her, present, purposeful, entirely without performance. The room registered their arrival. He felt it, the specific shift in social atmosphere that happens when a room has been anticipating something, and the thing has arrived. Conversations did not stop. They adjusted. The quality of the attention in the room changed from ambient to directed, in the way that attention changes when it has been waiting. Pembury was there. He was near the fireplace with 3 men Adrian recognized, county landowners. The kind who had been in these rooms for 30 years and had developed strong preferences for how things worked, and a corresponding resistance to anything that disrupted the preference. Pembury saw Adrian and Clara the moment they entered. His expression did not change visibly, which was itself a form of information. Clara saw him too. Adrian knew this because he had learned to read the small adjustments in how she carried herself, the particular settling of her shoulders when she had identified something that required management. She said nothing. She turned to their hostess, Mrs. Harrow, and engaged with complete warmth and attention, as though the room contained nothing more complicated than a pleasant evening. Lord Harrow found Adrian within minutes. Whitmore. He was a large, affable man, with the reputation of being fair and the practice of being careful. He shook Adrian's hand with the specific pressure of someone communicating something beyond a greeting. Good of you to come, of course. Harrow glanced toward the fireplace, toward Pembury and back. Pembury has been vocal this week, I am aware. Some of what he's saying is, Harrow paused, choosing. Not universally accepted. I want you to know that. Thank you, but some of it is finding an audience. He met Adrian's eyes directly. The crowd that was already uncomfortable with the idea of a duchess who attends committee meetings and asks questions about financial accounts. They were uncomfortable before Pembury gave them a vocabulary for it. I know who they are, Adrian said. Your wife is about to sit next to one of them at dinner. Harrow looked genuinely uncomfortable. The seating was arranged before I would change it if I could without creating more. Don't change it, Adrian said. Harrow blinked. Leave it as it is, Adrian said. Clara will manage. Harrow looked at him with the expression of a man updating a prior assessment. You're certain? I have been certain about very few things in my life, Adrian said. "I am certain about this," dinner was announced. Adrian found his seat and looked immediately for Clara. She was 4 places down on the opposite side of the table, well positioned for him to watch, without it being obvious that he was watching. To her left was a woman he recognized as Mrs. Darlington, who had been in 3 of Pembury's drawing room conversations, according to Frederick's intelligence. To her right was a man named Gould, a landowning neighbor of Harrow's, who had been at the Caldwell dinner and had laughed at Ashworth's joke before Ashworth was made to look foolish. Clara sat down. She looked at neither of them with any particular attention. She picked up her napkin with the ease of someone who had not identified a challenge, and she said something to Mrs. Harrow across the table, and Mrs. Harrow responded, and they had a brief, pleasant exchange about the meal. Gould to her right said something Adrian could not hear. Clara turned to him. She responded. Gould said something else. Whatever it was, it produced a very brief pause from Clara, the single beat of someone absorbing a remark and deciding how to receive it. Then she said something. Her voice was entirely level. Gould's expression shifted not dramatically, but in the specific way of a man who had expected one thing and received another. Mrs. Darlington, to Clara's left, leaned in slightly. Clara turned to her without hurry, said something. Mrs. Darlington's expression moved through a sequence. Adrian tracked carefully. Prepared response. Slight confusion. Recalibration. She said something back. Clara tilted her head, the gesture he recognized as genuine interest, and responded. By the time the first course was removed, Mrs. Darlington was talking to Clara the way people talk to someone they had not expected to find interesting. Gould had retreated into conversation with the man on his other side. Adrian turned back to his own end of the table. Frederick, seated 2 places down, caught his eye and gave him a look that translated precisely as, "I see it." He looked away before Adrian could respond. Across the table, Sir William Hurst, a man of 70, with the county magistrate bearing of someone who had watched social situations resolve themselves for decades, was watching Clara with the attentive expression of someone doing his own assessment. He had not spoken to either of them yet. He would. Adrian knew this because Sir William Hurst had a reputation for precision that Adrian respected, and he had the expression of a man who was waiting until he had enough information to say something worth saying. The meal continued. Midway through the second course, Pembury spoke across the table. He chose his moment carefully, a lull in the general conversation, the particular silence that settles between courses when people are gathering themselves. His voice was conversational, the tone of a man raising something incidental. "Lady Whitmore," he said, "I must say it is admirable the energy you have brought to county affairs. Very ambitious for someone so newly arrived." The table heard it. The word had weight behind it, not from its meaning, but from the specific way he used it. The way you use a word that has been circulating in private conversations and is now being placed, publicly, in the room. Clara turned to look at him. The table was very quiet. She said, "Thank you, Lord Pembury, though I would not call it ambition. I would call it attention." She held his gaze with complete steadiness. "You know the difference, of course." A beat. Pembury's expression held its composure. He said, "Of course. Though attention without experience can sometimes create disruption where none was intended. Or find disruption where it was very much intended," Clara said. "Also possible." The table did not quite stop. But the quality of the conversation around them compressed very slightly. The specific compression of 40 people managing the shared understanding that something significant has just occurred. Pembury smiled the social smile of a man deciding to manage rather than escalate. "Indeed, well." He turned to the man beside him. Clara turned back to her plate. Sir William Hurst, from his position 3 seats away, looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his wineglass and drank from it with the specific deliberateness of a man making a private decision. Adrian watched all of this. He did not intervene. He had known he would not need to. What he felt, watching her hold Pembury's gaze, without flinching and return to her dinner as though the exchange had been entirely unremarkable, was something he did not have an efficient name for. It was larger than pride. It was more personal than admiration. It was the feeling of someone recognizing, in another person, something that matches what they most respect in themselves. He had built his life on the principle that a man did not show what he felt until he knew precisely what to do with it. He was becoming less and less certain that principles was serving him correctly. After dinner, when the party moved to the drawing rooms and the social arrangements loosened, Sir William Hurst found Clara. Adrian saw it happen, Hurst crossing the room with the purposeful economy of a man who did not cross rooms without reason, reaching Clara where she stood with Mrs. Darlington, waiting for a pause in the conversation. He said something to Mrs. Darlington that excused her gracefully, and then he turned to Clara and spoke. Clara listened. Hurst spoke for perhaps 2 minutes. His expression throughout was the direct, considered expression of someone delivering a genuine assessment. Clara said something. Hurst nodded. He said something more. Then he extended his hand. Clara shook it, a proper handshake, not the social performance of it, but the actual thing. Hurst moved away. Frederick appeared at Adrian's elbow. "What was that?" "I don't know," Adrian said. "Sir William Hurst does not shake hands with people at dinner parties." "I know, he shook hands with your wife, I saw." Frederick looked at him. "You are not going to find out what he said." "She will tell me," Adrian said, "when she is ready." Frederick was quiet for a moment. "Then you have changed, you know." Adrian looked at his cousin. "In 6 weeks," Frederick said, without particular drama, as though he were reporting the weather. "You are different. I don't mean in ways most people would notice. I mean in the ways I notice." He paused. "You used to manage every room you walked into. You're not managing this one. I am managing it differently. You're trusting someone else to manage part of it." Frederick looked at him steadily. "You have never done that. Not once in 35 years. Adrian said nothing. "I am not criticizing," Frederick said. "I am observing." He paused. "She is good for you. I thought so at the wedding, and I have been confirmed in it every time I have visited." He picked up his wine glass. "I thought you should know that I think so." "Thank you, Frederick." "You're welcome." Frederick drifted away. Adrian looked across the room to where Clara stood, now alone with her wine glass, watching the party with the attentive, honest quality that was simply how she watched things. She glanced over and found him looking. She did not look away. Neither did he. She crossed the room to him. "Sir William Hurst," she said when she reached him. "What did he say?" "He told me that he was on the county charitable board 11 years ago when a similar situation arose. A committee member redirecting funds. He said it was mishandled, not exposed, but managed quietly, which meant it happened again." She looked at him. "He said he hoped this time would be handled differently. And he said he used very precise language. He said that a woman willing to name the problem in a room that would rather not hear it was doing something that the county needs more of, not less." She paused. "And then he shook my hand and told me to send my solicitor's report to the board directly, not through Lady Caldwell. He said he would ensure it received full consideration." Adrian looked at her. "Hurst is the chair of the county charitable board," he said. "I didn't know that," Clara said. "Most people don't. He doesn't advertise it." She absorbed this. "Then it matters." "Yes, it matters considerably." She looked at her wine glass. "I came to this room expecting to manage Pembury's narrative and Lady Caldwell's consequences. I did not expect," she stopped. "I did not expect someone like Hurst to be here." "The county is not only Pembury," Adrian said. "I should have said that more clearly earlier. You said it would be all right. I said we would manage." "That is not quite the same thing." He looked at her. "It is going to be better than all right. I want you to know that." She turned to look at him. The party moved around them, conversations and laughter, and the social machinery of an evening doing what it did, and in the middle of it, they were simply standing close to each other. Close enough that the conversation was entirely private. Two people who had arrived together and would leave together, and had, in the weeks between those simple facts, become something that was not yet named, but was no longer deniable. "Adrian," she said. "Yes, I want to tell you something. About why I agreed to this marriage." She said it carefully, the way she said things that cost her. "My father presented it as the best available option." Which was true, and I accepted it as a responsible decision. Which it was. She looked at him. "But I also accepted it because I had spoken to you. In those 3 meetings, and even in those 3 meetings, managed and formal as they were, I could see that you were." She paused. "What?" he said. "Honest," she said, "in your way. Contained and controlled and managed, but honest. Not performing a version of yourself that didn't exist. Not trying to be what you thought I wanted." She looked at him directly. "I had had enough of men who performed. I decided that honest and contained was better than warm and false. A pause. I did not expect it to become more than that. The room was very loud around them. He heard none of it. What did you expect it to become? He asked. She looked at him steadily. I expected a workable life. Mutual respect. Adequate. She held his gaze. I did not expect to look forward to our evenings. I did not expect to want to tell you things every day. Things that happened. Things I noticed. Things I thought because I want to know what you think about them. She stopped. I did not expect to find that the most interesting mind I have encountered in my adult life was in this house. He was very still. That is more than adequate, he said. Yes, she said, it is considerably more. He looked at her. He thought about the 13 years of the managed life, the efficient, controlled, correct life that had produced in him the specific kind of loneliness that is almost impossible to name because you have never been offered the alternative. He thought about the first morning of their marriage when she had asked him a direct question no one had ever asked him. He thought about every conversation in every room since then, the accumulation of them, the specific weight of a woman who consistently offered him her honest self and asked for the same in return. He said, I have been trying, for 6 weeks, to identify the correct way to tell you something. She waited. I have not found a way that is sufficiently efficient, he said. So I am going to say it directly, which I believe is the method you prefer. It is, she said. I did not want this marriage, he said. I have told you that. I thought I wanted a correct wife. A duchess who would fulfill the requirements. He looked at her without managing what was in his face. I have discovered that what I actually want is this. You, the specific, inconvenient, direct, entirely irreplaceable person who arrived at Ravenshire 6 weeks ago and has been rearranging it ever since. He paused. I am not certain I am saying this correctly. You are saying it correctly, she said. Her voice was slightly different, lower. The voice of someone managing something larger than she expected to be managing in this room. I love you, he said, straightforward, unperformed. I want to be clear about that because I think clarity matters to you, and I think it matters to me to say it clearly. She looked at him. 40 people moved around them in Lord Harrow's drawing room, in the middle of a county dinner party that had been arranged in part as a social battlefield. And Adrian Whitmore stood in the middle of it and looked at his wife, and felt none of the managed distance that had constituted his emotional life for as long as he could remember. She put her hand on his arm, not dramatic, not performed. The gesture of a person reaching for something, the sign they have decided they are willing to reach for. I know, she said quietly. I have known for some time. I was waiting for you to arrive at it in your own way. He looked at her. You needed to manage it first, she said. Understand it completely before you named it. That is how you work. The small thing at the corner of her mouth. I found it endearing, which surprised me. And what about you, he said. What do I love you, she said simply, directly, in the voice she used for true things. I have loved you since the night you rode out to the Holt farm at 10 o'clock without being asked, and spent 3 hours being entirely useless in an emergency, and did not once make it about yourself. She held his gaze. That is when I knew. He looked at her, the useless night at the Holt farm. He had carried the memory of that evening as a mild embarrassment. The Duke, who could do nothing practically useful in a crisis that required practical usefulness. She had carried it as the moment she had known she loved him. He thought about what it meant that they had been carrying the same evening so differently. I sat on that ride home, he said, and thought about how I had managed this estate for 13 years, and had never once thought to ask what Mrs. Holt's days were like. I know, you changed that. You changed it, she said. I simply pointed at it. Across the room, Pembury was speaking to someone with the expression of a man who has found that his planned maneuver has not produced the expected result and is currently revising. Adrian was aware of this distantly, the way you are aware of weather that no longer concerns you. We should rejoin the party, Clara said. Yes, she did not move immediately. Neither did he. Then she smiled, the full, unguarded version he had seen only a handful of times, the one she kept for moments she had not prepared for. And he felt it the way you feel truth, when it arrives in a form you had not expected, completely, without the ability to manage what it did to you. They rejoined the party. The following week, Hatch delivered a formal report to the County Charitable Board. The board met on a Wednesday. Sir William Hurst chaired the meeting. Pembury had engaged a solicitor. The solicitor presented an argument that was elegant and ultimately insufficient, because Hatch had done his work with his characteristic thoroughness, and the accounts told a story that could not be effectively reframed. The board found in favor of full disclosure and referred the matter to the county magistrate. Pembury resigned from the charitable committee before he could be removed from it. He left the county 3 weeks later visiting relations, according to the announcement in the social pages. The nature of the visit, and the fact that it appeared to be open-ended, said everything that the announcement did not. Lady Caldwell wrote to Clara. The letter was 2 pages, which was twice her usual length, and it said, among other things, I spent 40 years building things I believed were solid. I am grateful to have learned before I ran out of time to correct it that one of them had a rot I could not see. A woman who cares enough to tell you the truth about your own house is rarer than any of us deserve. Read the letter twice and put it carefully in the drawer of her writing desk, with the letter from her father that she still had not answered, and the note from Mrs. Holt in the drawing Oliver had made her at Christmas. She told Adrian about it that evening. He listened to the whole account. Then he said, "You know what this means for the committee. She'll want me more involved. You'll have to manage it." "I know," she looked at him steadily. "I find that I don't mind." "You shouldn't," he said. "You are good at it." "You said that," she noted without any qualification. "It did not require one." She looked at him. "Adrian," she said. "Yes, I want to do something," she said too carefully, with the quality of someone who has been thinking for several days and has arrived at a conclusion. "The village school, near the North Field. It was abandoned. I saw it in the first week." He had driven past it dozens of times. He had noted its existence the way he noted everything about the estate catalogued, filed, allocated to the category of things that were not urgent. "What about it? It should be reopened." She held his gaze. "The children on the tenant farms, Mrs. Holt's youngest, is 11. There are at least 8 children, within reasonable distance, who have no schooling. A properly run village school would." "Yes," he said. She stopped. "You haven't let me finish." "I don't need to." He looked at her. "You have already considered the costs and the staffing and the practical questions, and you have a plan." "The answer is yes." She looked at him for a moment. "How do you know I have a plan?" "Because you always have a plan before you raise something," he said. "You do not bring half-considered ideas into conversations. It would waste both our time, and you find that inefficient." The look on her face, the specific brightness of being seen with precision, of being known accurately, was the look he had come to understand was the truest version of her pleasure. Not flattery, not performance, the pleasure of accurate recognition. "I have a plan," she confirmed. "Tell me," she told him. It was, as he had expected, thoroughly considered. Practical, realistic, accounting for the actual costs and the available resources, and the social negotiation required to recruit a competent teacher to a position in a village school that had been closed for a decade. When she finished, he said, "Carrie can arrange the building assessment." "I was going to ask." "I know." He looked at her. "I am saving you the step." She smiled, the full one, the unguarded one. "You are learning to be efficient." "I have a good teacher," he said. She laughed. The sound of it filled the sitting room the way it had been filling rooms for weeks. Now the real laugh surprised out of her. The one she had not given freely until she had decided this house was somewhere she could afford to give it. He had begun to understand that the laugh was a form of trust. She only laughed like that with people who had earned it. He had earned it. He sat with the specific, durable knowledge of that. Outside, the spring was beginning, the particular quality of English spring that arrives quietly, and then is simply there, the morning light appearing earlier than expected, the grounds beginning to show what they intended to become. The Northfield drainage had worked its first full cycle. The channel, cleared in January, had done exactly what Clara had predicted it would do. The yield projections for the season were the best Carrie had produced in 5 years. Mrs. Holt's husband had been well enough to return to moderate work since February. The kitchen at Ravenshire Manor was no longer understaffed. The linen supply had been replaced. These were small things. Each of them in isolation was a small thing, but they were the texture of a life being lived with attention rather than managed from a distance, and he had begun to understand that the small things were in fact the whole of it. The whole of what mattered, the whole of what had been missing for the 13 years he had been running this estate without truly being inside it. He was inside it now. He picked up his glass. Across from him, Clara had opened her notebook. She kept a small notebook. He had learned, for things she was working on, plans in various stages of development, and was reading something in it with her characteristic attention. He watched her read. He thought about a portrait painter and the expression his ancestors all shared. The expression of a man prepared to manage something. He thought about his own face in the glass on the morning of his wedding. He thought about what his face looked like now in the mornings and whether the expression had changed. He thought it had. He thought the change was specific and had a source and was sitting 3 feet away from him, reading her notebook. Clara looked up. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She studied him. "You have the expression you have when you are thinking something you have decided not to say yet." "I did not know I had such an expression." "You do." She returned to her notebook. "You will say it when you are ready." He would, he thought. "I did not want this marriage. I considered it necessary," he thought. "I was wrong about what I wanted. I was wrong about what necessary meant," he thought. She walked through the doors of a cathedral and did not look at me, and I looked at her, and something rearranged itself in me that I have spent 6 weeks refusing to name. He thought, "I will name it every day for the rest of my life if she will let me." He said, "The school." She looked up. "I want to be involved," he said. "In the reopening, not to manage it. It is your project. But I would like to be part of it." She looked at him steadily. "The tenant families are my responsibility," he said. "I have been meeting that responsibility from the outside for 13 years. He paused. "I think it is time to stop doing that." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, the word carrying more than its single syllable. "Good." She returned to her notebook. He returned to his reading. The fire settled. The house was quiet around them, and it was not the quiet of an empty house, not the managed silence of a man running an estate alone from behind a closed study door. It was the quiet of 2 people who had found, in the specific unrepeatable combination of who they were and who the other was, somewhere they both intended to stay. He had spent 35 years building a house. He was only now learning what it meant to make it a home. The village school opened on a Thursday in late April. It was not a grand occasion. Clara had been deliberate about this. No formal ceremony, no invited dignitaries, no speech from the Duke that would transform a practical act into a social performance. The children arrived at 9 o'clock with their mothers, most of them uncertain, most of the mothers more uncertain than the children, and the teacher Clara had recruited a woman named Miss Branton, 32. Educated, beyond what her circumstances had previously allowed her to use, met them at the door, with the composed warmth of someone who had been waiting for exactly this work. Adrian stood at the back of the room. He had not intended to stay. He had come to confirm the building was ready. The repairs had been completed the previous week, the furnishings sourced and delivered, the practical requirements managed with Carrie's usual efficiency, and he had intended to confirm it and return to the estate office. He had not left. He watched 8 children settle into chairs that fit them, watched Miss Branton introduce herself in the unhurried way of someone who understood she was working with time rather than against it, watched the mothers who had stayed exchange glances that moved from uncertainty towards something else. Mrs. Holt was there, with her granddaughter, her middle daughter's child, visiting for the month. The girl was 7, with the dark eyes and the serious expression of someone who understood that something significant was happening, even if she could not have named what it was. She sat in the front row and watched Miss Branton with complete attention. Clara stood beside Adrian. She said nothing. He said nothing. They watched the room find its footing in the specific quiet way of things that have been needed for a long time and are finally simply happening. After a while, Clara said quietly, "Mrs. Holt's granddaughter. I see her. She has not looked away from Miss Branton once." "No." Clara was quiet for a moment. "My father told me when I was 7 that a woman's education was an ornament, useful for conversation and nothing else." She said it without bitterness, simply as information. "I spent 20 years being educated in spite of that, and I have spent the last 3 months watching children who have not had the ornament or the substance." He looked at her profile. "Is that why you wanted this?" "Partly." She glanced at him. Partly because I am aware that my position, what I have access to, because of who I married, is something that can be used or can simply be held. And I find I am not interested in simply holding things. He thought about 13 years of holding the estate at arm's length, managing it from the outside, efficiently, correctly, without ever truly being inside it. No, he said, neither am I. She turned to look at him fully. He met her eyes and held them, and something passed between them that did not require language, the specific communication of two people who have arrived, from different directions, and by different routes, at the same understanding of what they are doing and why. Miss Branton began the first lesson. They stayed for another 20 minutes. When they left, they walked back to the manor together, and Clara slipped her hand into the crook of his arm in the easy, unperformed way she had developed in recent weeks, not a gesture for an audience, not a social signal. Simply the natural behavior of a person who had decided where she wanted to be and was being there. He covered her hand with his. They walked through the spring morning without speaking, and the silence was the best kind, the kind that does not need to be filled. The letter from Lord Ashford arrived on a Friday. Adrian saw it first. It came with the Morning Post, in Ashford's recognizable handwriting, addressed to Clara. He set it on the breakfast table at her place and said nothing about it, because it was hers, and it was not his place to prepare her for it before she had read it. She arrived at breakfast, saw the letter, and sat down without opening it immediately. She poured her tea. She looked at it. "It is from my father," she said. "I know. He has not written since the wedding." She picked it up. "He wrote to you twice about estate matters. He has not written to me." Adrian said nothing. She opened it. He watched her read it. He watched her face, the careful composure that was always her first response to her father. The particular emotional management of a woman who loved a parent who found her difficult and had long since made her peace with the gap between those two facts. She read it once, then again, then she set it down. "He has heard about the committee," she said, "and the magistrate's referral. And the school." She looked at the letter. "He says," she stopped, picked it up and read directly. "I have been told by 3 separate people this week that my daughter has distinguished herself in the county. I confess I did not know what to make of the first 2 accounts. By the third I had begun to understand that I may have the word I keep returning to is misread. I may have misread you, Clara, for a considerable time. I am not certain how to correct this, but I wished you to know that I am aware of it." She set the letter down. Adrian watched her. "That is not an apology," she said. "No, it is the closest he is capable of, probably." She was quiet for a moment. Her expression was doing something complicated, not grief exactly, not the great sting of old hurt freshly opened. Something more settled than that. The expression of someone who has carried a weight long enough that they know its precise dimensions and have learned to hold it without being crushed by it. "I spent a great deal of my life," she said, "wanting him to see me correctly. To use your word." She looked up at Adrian. "I stopped wanting it somewhere around 23. Not dramatically, I did not make a decision and release it. It simply became less urgent, the way things do when you stop watering them. And now," he said, "now I am glad he said it, and I am not waiting for more." She folded the letter precisely. "He is what he is. I am not going to unfold the whole history of it, waiting for a different version of him to appear." Adrian looked at his wife. He thought about her, at 23, this particular, inconvenient, clear-eyed woman at 23, deciding without ceremony to stop watering a need that was not being met, redirecting the energy toward things that would actually grow. "You are remarkable," he said. She looked at him with the expression she wore when she suspected she was being complimented in a way that required assessment. "You say that as though it is a new observation." "It is a recurring one," he said. "I keep arriving at it from different angles." The small thing at the corner of her mouth. "It sounds less like a compliment and more like an ongoing discovery." "That is exactly what it is," he said. She looked at him steadily, the full, unguarded look she gave now, without the management she had needed in the first weeks. "You have become quite good at saying things directly." "I had a good teacher," he said. "She has a strong preference for it." Clara laughed. He filed the sound in the place where he kept the things that were worth keeping. The laughter, the direct gaze, the way she folded her father's letter precisely and set it aside and picked up her tea and moved forward, because moving forward was simply what she did. The dinner with Frederick and his wife on a Saturday evening was the first formal family occasion they had hosted since the wedding breakfast. Frederick arrived with his wife, Arabella, a warm, direct woman who had met Clara at the Caldwell ball and had, according to Frederick's subsequent report, immediately decided that she approved. This approval had been communicated in the specific, efficient way of women who have already made their assessment and see no reason to delay acting on it. She had written to Clara the following week and proposed a friendship, in those exact words, without the social preamble of incremental acquaintance. Clara had written back within the day. Arabella came through the door now with the energy of someone who has been looking forward to an evening, and she took Clara by both hands and said, "I have been hearing things about you all week. The school, the committee, Pembury's exit from the county." She paused. "Tell me everything." Clara laughed, the real one, and they moved into the sitting room before Adrian had exchanged more than 6 words with his cousin. Frederick watched them go. Then, he looked at Adrian with the expression he had been wearing at intervals since the wedding, the expression of someone confirming something over and over because they keep finding it true. "She is good," he said. "I keep saying it because it keeps being true." "I know. Arabella has not stopped talking about her since the Caldwell dinner." He paused. "She said, and I am reporting this accurately," she said, "that woman will be important in this county for the next 30 years. And everyone who is skeptical of her now will spend those 30 years revising themselves." "Arabella is perceptive," Adrian said. "She is right more often than is comfortable." Frederick picked up his wine. "How are you?" The question was simple, and Frederick meant it simply, which was the reason Adrian answered it directly instead of managing it. "Better than I have been in a long time," he said. Frederick looked at him. "That is not a managed answer." "No, you are not going to qualify it." No, Frederick was quiet for a moment. "Then I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without deflecting." "All right, I have watched you run this estate for 13 years, Frederick said. "Correctly, responsibly. Alone, I have watched you become someone so accustomed to carrying everything by yourself that you stopped knowing there was another way." He paused. "I am glad it changed. I am glad she is here. And I want you to know that the version of you that is sitting here right now, the one that doesn't manage every sentence before it leaves his mouth, is someone I have been hoping to meet for a significant portion of my life." Adrian looked at his cousin. "Thank you," he said. Not with the contained efficiency of a man resisting something and filing it. With the actual weight of it landing. "You're welcome," Frederick said. He raised his glass. "Now tell me about the school. Arabella will want details from Clara, and I want them from you, so that I am not entirely lost in the conversation at dinner." Adrian told him about the school. Dinner was the best evening Ravenshire Manor had produced in Adrian's memory. Not because it was elaborate, because it was alive. Arabella and Clara talked with the ease of people who have recognized something in each other and have given themselves permission to act on it, the conversation moving fast, doubling back on itself, opening doors that stayed open. Frederick contributed observations with the dry precision that was his particular gift. Adrian found himself in conversation he was not managing, in which he was simply present, and in which his presence was not the formal presence of the Duke, but the quieter, more durable presence of himself. He spoke about the Northfield drainage. He told the story of how he had learned about it, Clara's offhand observation in the estate meeting, her return to her letter as though she had said nothing significant, and he watched Clara's expression as he told it, watched her absorb the fact that he had been keeping this particular memory. "You remember it that precisely," she said. "I remember most things about the first weeks with some precision," he said. "I was paying close attention." "Why?" Arabella asked, with the guileless directness of a woman who asked questions she actually wanted answered. He looked at Clara when he answered. "Because I had understood very quickly that I was in the presence of someone I had not correctly anticipated. And I have never found it useful to be inattentive in situations I have not correctly anticipated." Clara held his gaze for a moment. "He says things like that," she told Arabella, "and expects me to receive them without reaction." "Can you?" Arabella asked. "Less and less," Clara said. Frederick, who had been watching both of them, with the expression of a man enjoying himself thoroughly, refilled his wine and said nothing, which was his version of great happiness. After Frederick and Arabella had gone, the house settled into its late evening quiet. Adrian was in the study not working, a circumstance he had become considerably more comfortable with in recent weeks, simply sitting with a book that was not fully holding his attention. He heard Clara in the corridor, heard her pause outside the door, heard her knock once and come in without waiting, as she had learned to do in the weeks after the committee meeting. She sat in the chair across from him. She was still in her dinner dress, and she had her hair down a state he had seen her in only in the mornings, and which always produced in him the specific awareness of seeing someone in an unguarded moment. She looked tired in the good way, the exhaustion of an evening that had given, rather than taken. "Frederick loves you," she said. "I know. He watches you the way people watch someone they have been worried about." She looked at him directly. "Has he been worried about you?" "Probably. He has never said so directly. That is not his way. His way is to show up frequently and make observations and pretend they are not concerned." "Yes, that is a kind way to love someone," she said. "Showing up consistently without requiring to perform gratitude for the showing up." He looked at her. "You understand him." "I understand the instinct." She looked at her hands. "It is how I have managed most of my significant relationships. Show up, be useful, do not require too much acknowledgement." She paused. "It is a good instinct for protecting other people. It is a less good instinct for protecting yourself." "Clara," he said. She looked up. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer it without managing the answer first." She looked at him with the wary attention of someone who recognized her own request being returned to her. "All right, are you happy?" he said. She held his gaze. "Here," he said, "at Ravenshire." He paused. "In this life we are building. Are you happy?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone working toward an answer. The quiet of someone letting themselves feel the question properly before they answered it, which was different. "Yes," she said, simply, no qualification, "I am." She looked at him steadily. "I have been happy before in moments in particular circumstances. But this is it is not a moment, it is not circumstantial." She paused. "I wake up in the morning, and I want to know what the day will bring. I did not used to do that. I woke up and I managed what the day brought." She held his eyes. "That is different. That is something I did not know I was missing." He looked at her. He thought about the morning of their wedding. The correct decision, the managed life, the man in the glass with the expression of his ancestors. He thought about what it cost a person to have the right things and still be empty, and what it meant to discover the specific nature of what had been missing. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me." "I wrote a letter," he said, 3 weeks ago. "I have not sent it because I have been deciding whether it was the right thing to send." He opened the desk drawer and took it out, a single sheet, folded twice. He held it for a moment. "It is to your father." She went very still. "Not a confrontation," he said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. Nothing that would put you in a difficult position or require anything from you." He looked at the letter. "I wrote to tell him to inform him as a formal matter that his daughter has distinguished herself in the conduct of this household and in the management of her responsibilities to this estate and this county, and that he should be aware of it." He paused. "And that the qualities he experienced as inconvenient were the qualities that have made her exceptional, and that I consider it one of the significant failures of judgment in my adult life that I did not understand this before I married her." Clara was looking at him. He set the letter on the desk between them. "I did not send it because I was not certain you would want me to. It is your relationship with him, and I will not step into it without your permission." He met her eyes. "But I wanted you to know it was written." The silence that followed was the particular silence of something that has gone very deep. She looked at the letter. "You wrote that," she said. 3 weeks ago. "Yes, before the school opened." Before the school opened. She looked at the letter for a long moment. "May I read it?" He pushed it across the desk. She unfolded it and read it. He watched her face as she did watched it move through a sequence he could not fully track. Too fast, too layered, too much of her in it that she was not managing. When she finished, she set it down. She looked at the window. He waited. "Send it," she said. "Are you certain?" "Yes." She looked back at him. Her eyes were slightly bright. Not crying. Clara did not cry in front of him yet, though he suspected she did occasionally in private. Because she was a person who felt things fully, and he had seen the evidence of it in the careful way she sometimes composed herself before entering a room. "He needs to read it. Not for me, I have made my peace with what he is. But because it is true, and true things should be said, and you said it well, she looked at the letter. You said it better than I could have said it about myself. You would not have said it about yourself, he said. That is the difference. She met his eyes. Adrian, she said. Yes, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without deflecting. She was returning his phrase to him, and they both knew it, and the recognition of it moved between them with the warmth of two people who have built enough shared language to play with it. All right, he said. You are the person I did not know I was looking for, she said. When I came here, I was looking for a manageable life. An honest man, someone who would not require me to be less than I am. She held his gaze with the full, direct, unmanaged look. I did not know that the honest man would turn out to be someone who makes me want to be more than I was. Not more to please you more, because being known by you has made me understand what I am capable of. She paused. That is not something I expected to find, and I do not know how to say it efficiently, so I am saying it fully. He looked at her. He stood up from the desk and walked around it and sat in the chair beside her. The chair no one usually sat in, pulled close. She turned toward him. You have already said it as efficiently as it needs to be said, he said. She looked at his face. At this face she had been learning for months, that she had first assessed honestly, and later learned to love in its specific, particular, irreplaceable details. He reached over and took her hand, not the brief pressure of the carriage, not the formal contact of public occasions. He held her hand the way you hold something you have decided you are not letting go of. I need to tell you something else, he said. Tell me. When you walked through those cathedral doors, he said, and you did not look at me. I watched you walk the entire length of that aisle without looking at me. And I thought, she is not performing this. And then you looked at me at the altar, and it was the most direct look anyone had given me in years. And I thought, I have made an enormous miscalculation. She tilted her head. A miscalculation. I had calculated that this marriage would be correct, he said. I had not calculated that it would be. He paused, and she watched him arrive at the word, the genuine word, not the managed one. Necessary, in the real sense. In the sense of, I do not know how I functioned before this, and I cannot imagine functioning without it. He looked at her steadily. Without you. She was quiet for a moment. You calculated incorrectly, she said. Yes, in your favor, considerably. The smallest pause. Then, mine too. He raised her hand and held it for a moment, a gesture without precedent in his 35 years of managed, controlled living, a gesture that was simply itself, simply the expression of a man who has finally stopped arguing with what he feels. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move. He did not make it a moment. He simply let it be what it was, two people in a study, late in the evening, in the house that was now genuinely theirs, holding each other with the particular ease of something that has stopped being new and started being home. The summer came to Ravenshire in the way of things that have been waited for and arrive without ceremony. The North Fields produced their best yield in 6 years. Carrie reported this with the contained satisfaction of a man who respects competent analysis wherever it originates, and did not say, though everyone understood, that the drainage had been the key. The village school had 11 children by July. Miss Branton had requested a second reading primer and 2 additional slates, which Clara ordered the same day the request arrived. Mrs. Holt's granddaughter had, according to Miss Branton's weekly report, read her first full sentence aloud in class. Mrs. Holt had been told. Miss Branton reported that Mrs. Holt had needed a moment before she could respond. Clara read this report at the breakfast table and was quiet for a moment. Adrian, across from her, said, "The girl in the front row." Yes, Clara set the report down. She was watching Miss Branton from the first minute and has not stopped. She has someone who is paying attention, he said. Children flourish when someone is paying attention. Clara looked at him. Then she said, with the directness that was her essential quality, "You would make an excellent father." He set his coffee cup down. She held his gaze without wavering. This was not an accident. It was Clara, which meant it was deliberate, which meant she had been thinking about it, and had decided that the time for saying it was now. He stopped. "You do not have to respond immediately," she said. "I said it because it is true, and I believe in saying true things." She picked up her tea. "I did not say it to pressure you toward anything. I said it because I have been watching you with Mrs. Holt's granddaughter, and with the children at the school opening, and I know what I see." He looked at his wife. He thought about what it would mean. He thought about the house, the rooms that had been closed and had begun to open, the portraits uncovered, the vase that Clara had put flowers in every week since the first one she had left, without explanation on a Monday morning, and which had simply continued since then. He thought about the life they were building. He thought about who he was when he was with her, and who he had been before, and the distance between those two people, and what it meant that the distance felt, now, navigable. "I think," he said carefully, "that I would like that. If you would." "I would," she said. Simply the voice she used for true things. He picked up his coffee. She returned to the report. The morning continued, ordinary and entirely sufficient, in the way that mornings are when the life around them is finally the right shape. Frederick's account of the summer, delivered in a letter to Arabella's sister in August, contained one passage that was read aloud at 3 different dinner tables in the county before the month was out. He wrote, "My cousin Adrian is unrecognizable from the man I knew before February. I do not mean that he has become someone different. I mean that the man I always believed was somewhere inside him, has finally been given the conditions under which he could exist. His wife is the primary condition. She is in every possible measurement the right person for the job which is not actually a job, but which requires exactly the specific combination of qualities Clara Whitmore possesses: intelligence, directness, patience, humor, and the particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. She walked into Ravenshire and did not try to change it. She simply paid attention, and the change arrived on its own." Clara read this letter. Arabella had sent it, with a note saying she thought Clara ought to know what Frederick had said, and brought it to Adrian in the study. She read the passage aloud. He listened. Then he said, "Frederick has always been better at seeing people than at telling them directly." "He told you directly," Clara said, "at the Harrow dinner. He said you had changed. He said I was different." "That is the same thing, not always." He looked at her. "Different can mean the situation changed. Changed means I changed." He paused. "He was right. I changed, so did I," Clarissa said. He looked at her. How? She thought about this, the real thinking, not the quick answer. "I stopped calibrating." She met his eyes. "I spent 27 years calibrating. Measuring how much was too much, how direct was too direct, how much space I was allowed to take up." She paused. "I stopped. Somewhere in the first 2 months. I stopped, and I was waiting for something to go wrong for the version of me that stops calibrating to be too much, and nothing went wrong." He looked at her steadily. "Nothing will, I know that now," she said. "That is the change." He stood from the desk. He crossed to her and stood in front of her, close, and lifted his hand and touched her face just briefly, just his hand against her cheek. The gesture of a man who has learned to let himself do the simple human thing, rather than managing it into a form that feels safer. She looked up at him. "No jewel in this house," he said quietly, "compares to you." She looked at him. "I know what they are worth," he said. "I have the catalogue. I know the provenance of every piece in the collection. I know what they cost and what they represent." He held her gaze. "And I know that none of it is worth what walked through those cathedral doors in February." She reached up and covered his hand with hers. "You are going to make it very difficult," she said, "for me to maintain any composure at all." "Good," he said. "You maintain enough composure for both of us on most occasions. I can afford to disrupt it occasionally." She laughed. He would remember this, later, this specific moment in the study in August. The summer light, and the sound of her laughter and his hand against her face, and the specific quality of a life that has arrived at something it did not know it was moving toward. He would remember it with the precise clarity he kept for things that mattered, filed in the part of himself that had been empty for a long time, and was no longer. He would write it, later, in the private diary that he had kept since his father's death, and that Clara did not know about yet, and that he would show her the following spring, because she deserved to know that he had been writing his way toward her before he knew she was what he was writing toward. He would write, "I spent my life believing I possessed everything a man could desire. Then she appeared, and I discovered the only thing I had ever truly been missing. Not a duchess, not a correct wife, not a woman who could stand beside me at formal occasions and manage the social requirements and continue the family name. A person, the specific, irreplaceable, entirely singular person who walked the length of a cathedral aisle without looking at me, and then looked at me, and in that look, in that one honest, unperformed, direct look showed me more of myself than 35 years of mirrors had managed. She did not come here to save me. She came here to marry me, under the same conditions I did, practically, responsibly, without illusion. She came because it was the correct decision, the manageable life, the workable arrangement. And somewhere between the correct decision and the workable arrangement, she became the reason I understand what it means to be alive in a life, rather than managing one. No jewel in my possession, no title, no estate, no inheritance of wealth or land or name comes within any reasonable distance of her. She is the whole of it. She has always been the whole of it. I was simply the last one to understand. On the last evening of August, they walked the north fields together. It was something they had taken to doing in the evenings when the light was long moving through the estate, with the ease of people who have settled into a place and made it genuinely theirs. The fields were finished for the season, the harvest complete, the land already preparing itself for what came next. Clara walked beside him with her hand in his arm in the easy, natural way. She said, "I have been thinking about next year's village school term." "Tell me," she told him. He listened, asking the occasional precise question, the back and forth of two people who think together well. The plan was, as always, thoroughly considered. He told her so. "You always say that," she said. "You always merit it." She stopped walking. He stopped too, turned to look at her. She was looking at him with the full, direct, unmanaged look, the one she gave him now, without hesitation, without the calibration she had spent 27 years practicing and had finally set down. "I want you to know something," she said. "Tell me." "The morning of our wedding," she said, "I came through those doors and I did not look at you." "Not immediately." She paused. "I did not look because I was afraid of what I would see." A man who saw a role, a position, a correct choice. She held his gaze. "And then I looked. And you were looking at me, not at the Duchess, not at the arrangement, at me. In the specific way you look at things when you are actually trying to understand them." She paused. "I thought perhaps, I did not think more than that." Just perhaps at her. "And now," he said. She smiled, the full one, the real one, the one she had given him more and more freely as the months had passed and the calibrations had fallen away one by one. "Now," she said, "I think I was right." He looked at his wife, this woman who had walked through cathedral doors in February and rearranged him, quietly and without announcement, into someone he had not known was available to him. He raised her hand and held it. Behind them, the north field stretched out in the last long light of the summer evening, productive, properly drained, flourishing, in the specific way of things that have been given the right conditions and the right attention. Ahead of them, the manor waited with its lit windows and its opened rooms, and the flowers in the entrance hallways, and the portraits back on the walls. Beside him, Clara looked at it all with the particular expression he had come to love, most the honest, clear-eyed, forward-facing look of a woman who knows exactly where she is, and has decided it is precisely where she intends to be. He had spent 35 years building a house. He had spent 6 months learning what it meant to deserve one. He had, in the end, needed neither the jewels nor the title nor the managed, controlled, efficient performance of the Duke of Ravenshire. He had needed someone to look at him honestly. She had done that from the first moment. The rest had simply followed. They walked home together through the August evening, and the light was long, and the house was warm, and it was enough, more than enough, considerably more than enough, to be exactly here, exactly this, exactly themselves.